How did he live? Do you have any idea?
Well, he didn't have a lot up there to begin with. How did the Navy, the least likely branch of service, come to create the country's first go-anywhere commando force? My grandfather, who I was very close to, was a Marine. At the end of Okinawa, he had volunteered for the UDT. So I knew what the UDTs were and I knew what the SEAL teams were. But I was so bad at sports and had such little hand-eye coordination. It was known throughout the SEAL teams. I thought it was the quintessential SEAL deployment. But it wasn't until I came back from that deployment that I really started to understand how little I understood. The whole thesis of my book was that the SEAL teams wouldn't have existed without the failure and neglect of Marine Corps and Army and OSS and CIA units.
How do you quickly synopsize that? Or
I don't have a good quick answer for anything.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He spent 7 years in the SEAL teams, a couple years after that doing some contract work, which I don't know if we can get into that or not. Maybe a little bit.
I don't even think it's worth it.
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll give it a shot. He's the author of the amazing book, By Water Beneath the Walls, The Rise of the U.S. Navy SEALs, which encapsulates the history of the SEAL teams. And I'd say, you're a subject matter expert of the community, and there's a lot of questions that I have, and I know we have as listeners, about some things that I think a lot of people don't know about. So I'm really, really excited to get into the book. Recipient of the Bronze Star. Ladies and gents, welcome to the stage, Ben Milligan.
Great to be here, Mike. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming. I know you're a busy guy. We can't talk about what you're currently doing, but to carve time out to come sit down and take shit from me is humbling, to say the least. I appreciate you doing that. What's the last full book that you've read?
The last full book, probably the Mauritius Command. Was the. I've got a pile of books that I'm always reading, so that's the fourth book in the Patrick O'Brien, Aubrey Maturin series, the Master and Commander. I don't know if you saw the movie, but the books are world class.
Really?
A handful of times I've had friends who have they've taken over a SEAL team or they've taken over BUDS or something like that, and always the same gift I send them is the first book in that series.
Is there a singular takeaway, or is there too many to pick one?
Oh yeah, it's just it's the inner monologue of leadership. A lot of it is it's the interaction of the leader with the man and the leader with the mission.
Yeah,
I think the movie does a really great job of bringing the whole series to life and showing you what these. He wrote 17 of these books, so I've been trying to read one a year, since I started reading them. So I'm only on the fourth one, but I don't know any other series in literature that is as good as these in showing or describing the inner monologue that fighting men go through.
Do you think that the lessons that you take away in those books apply to business or being a father or leader of a household, or is it pretty specific to leading fighting men?
I think probably the latter, because there are you do get their home life, not until I think the third book, when they start interacting with potential love interests and having children and things like that. So there's not a ton of that I've seen so far. It's mostly the other, but it's a different time too. When the author's so, one of the reasons the author is so good was because he immersed himself in the 18th and early 19th century. I mean, his use of language, I think, is probably as close as you're going to get to what actual dialogue was in those periods, and he immersed himself not just in the literature that was written, but he also went into the Admiralty's archives and spent a lifetime just going through. So when you read the Mauritius Command, you're reading about fictional characters in real events, doing real things that actually happened, in the Indian Ocean.
Wow.
So I think those are great books. I finished. So I was listening to at the same time I was reading that, I was listening to Mike Vickers' book. He'd be a great guest to have on the podcast. That was it's interesting. I mean, it wasn't. I wouldn't call it literature. I listened to it probably on 2 times speed. I think you can get away with that with some of these autobiographies. They tend to read a little fast. Interesting to particularly from someone who spends all their free time just reading and writing history. Reading about characters that I'm encountering in my own research and seeing them from a different angle, I thought was great. And then not only that, but having lived like we all have through the last 2 decades of war, and getting to know some of the personalities, the higher ranks, in the Defense Department and the national security apparatus. It's neat to see, it's neat to see them and hear, somebody talk about interacting with them. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. What is Mike Vickers' book called?
By All Means Necessary, and he was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Low Intensity Conflict under, was it Obama? I guess it was. No, it was under Bush. Under Bush, and then Obama kept him on, and then he took another position. I can't remember what the actual position was, but he was an Undersecretary of Defense under Trump.
Low intensity conflict seems like an oxymoron.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the.
Do you know what the definition for low intensity entails? Because
I'm suspicious of all. As a historian and having lived in this, and then I'm suspicious of all definitions of unconventional operations.
Really?
Yeah.
What
I have my own definitions that I've taken the last 3 years to kind of go through and actually try to understand what all these things are.
What's the I guess the main reason that you're suspicious of it?
I think they're too complex to be usable. So when Green Berets, they try to parse language and say we don't, we're not, we're the unconventional warfare experts. What's unconventional warfare? Is it guerrilla warfare? No, it's unconventional warfare. Well, I understand what special operations does in 3. I mean, really, what are we doing? We're doing. I call them the 3 R's. Recon, wrecking, and raiding. That's it. So if you're training in indigenous forces, which is what a lot of special forces specialize in, but you're training them to do one of those 3 activities. You're either trying to sneak behind enemy lines to find out what the enemy is doing in a way that we aren't able to use electronic means or something else. You're either going to destroy, sabotage, something that they have, or you're going to raid, either for to destroy, enemy behind the lines or rescue people that are trapped or something like that. So I think when special operations gets beyond those 2 or those 3 specialties, we're starting to drift.
Is there one way that you've seen special operations as an entire community, irrespective of branch, tend to drift towards primarily in the last 20 years? That we shouldn't have?
20 years, I wouldn't even pretend to be an expert.
Oh, okay.
My expertise is in from that period, from World War II to Vietnam, and I'm starting to become I would say an expert in the next 20 years after that. But you'll find me clam up real quick when you want me to ask authoritatively questions about the last 20 years. I won't answer questions unless I have the data in front of me, unless I feel like I'm an expert. Because I've spent so much time, in the archive, with the material, and it took 10 years to write, this book. So 10 years of, developing, the expertise of the confidence.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest example of that in the period of time that I studied was special forces with Green Berets, and I spent. One of the questions that the publisher asked me when I finally turned the manuscript in was, for a book about the SEAL teams, there's sure a lot in here about, not the SEAL teams. I have entire chapters about the Rangers, the Marine Corps Raiders, and the Army's Green Berets.
Hey guys, I want to take a minute to tell you about the Mic Drop Patreon, where you can get the real mic drop experience the way it's meant to be seen. You get completely uncensored, unfiltered, and uncut episodes with nothing held back, just raw, real conversations directly from me to you, without YouTube censorship. Plus, you'll see it days before anyone else, with early premieres and exclusive bonus content that you won't find anywhere else. You get behind-the-scenes access to the show, including pre- and post-show footage, with me and the guest both in studio and on location, depending on what the guest is into and what we have going on. On top of that, we've got tons of Patreon-only perks, mic drop swag, access to exclusive merch, and the chance to submit your questions to be asked at the end of every episode. You'll also get a sneak peek at our upcoming guests, so you'll know who's in the studio weeks before anyone else. We're constantly releasing new features and dropping new content based on what you want to see. For our top tier members, you get the same Mic Drop Challenge coin that all of my guests receive from the upcoming show, which will never ever be for sale. We've got quarterly merch that's sent out directly to you, a monthly Zoom call with me where we talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, and an active group chat where we all shoot the shit on a daily basis. All of that for just a few bucks a month to support the show. Right now, we're also offering a 10% discount off an annual subscription, which means that you get more than a free month. I want to say thank you to everyone who has already signed up. Your support means that we get to keep bringing you the content that you love. So if you haven't yet, hit the link in the description or go to patreon.com/micdrop and join the team. I'll see you guys in there. Thank you.
Since the Civil War, dogs have stood alongside our military, proving to be indispensable partners. Our military prioritized ensuring proper canine nutrition for optimal performance, recognizing its vital role in mission success. Team Dog embodies that standard, offering science-based, customizable meal plans tailored to your dog's unique needs. Developed by a former Navy SEAL and canine trainer, Team Dog Food ensures the highest quality nutrition for our canine companions. Improve your dog's well-being. Be your dog's hero with Team Dog.
So I say all that to say that my chapter on the Green Berets was a confusing chapter for me because I didn't know why I was writing it. It was like the whole thesis of my book was that the SEAL teams wouldn't have existed without the failure and neglect of Marine Corps and Army and OSS and CIA units. It allowed the Navy to identify gaps and then sail into those gaps. It was, but when I got to, Army Green Berets, every unit that had preceded the SEALs' creation had been created by the Army, then disbanded, recreated by the Army and disbanded. Same thing with the Marine Corps. When I get to the Green Berets, they'd been created, 8 years before the SEALs are created, but never disbanded. So I was like, well, there goes my thesis. I spent, 6 years working on this book. What the hell am I going to say now? It wasn't until I really dug into, and I spent a solid year before I wrote a single word on the Green Berets, until I really understood their history and what they had gone through. And that history was, they had been created, at the tail end of the Korean War, to sort of act as a stopgap. They weren't exactly Rangers, but they also weren't exactly CIA operatives. Their whole purpose was to, jump behind the lines, lead a band of partisans in those types of, 3 R's that I mentioned before: recon, wrecking, and raiding, and act as commandos without putting American lives at risk. Now, in the 7 years after their creation, they had existed like that for about 7 years. And it's when Kennedy comes into office that he sees a different vision for Army Special Forces and starts to, he doesn't do this, but he's attracted to one leader in particular, Bill Yarbrough, who takes over the Army Special Warfare School and starts to change Special Forces from being that recon, wrecking, and raiding course into being experts in counterinsurgency, which counterinsurgency is slightly different. Counterinsurgency is, area denial in some sense. You're not creating these bands of fighters to do those 3 missions. You're creating these bands of fighters to deny them to the enemy. So the skills that you need to come in and recruit bands of indigenous tribes are not necessarily, the skills to set an ambush. They're the skills to dig a well or set up a hospital or a clinic or something like that. So it completely changes special forces, and that's what opened the gap for another unit to sort of sneak in there.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
That's probably the longest.
Yeah,
I need a nap now.
Longest. What did you take away from the book?
My longest, exposition about what the Army Green Berets failed in.
Oh, I love it. And we're going to dive all the way into that here in just a little bit. I just want to get through a little bit of your background first and kind of the lightning round. But if time travel was possible, where and when would you go and why?
I don't know. The battle that I probably spent the most amount of time on was, so I wrote, I took, solid 6 months to research my D-Day chapters. So the idea of being at Omaha Beach and seeing that fleet come out of the mist would be pretty remarkable. Oh, wait a second. Am I a participant or am I just an observer?
Either. Whatever you want to do.
If I'm an observer,
it's your time machine.
If I'm an observer, I would like to see D-Day.
Yeah.
I'd like to see how it actually happened, because even having written about it and having led a couple of tours now on the D-Day battlefields, I think I still don't know exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know a lot of people who know more than me. So I want to know how that wall was actually cracked. Was it the tanks getting ashore? Was it the pockets of 1st Division soldiers that actually made it to the top of the bluffs? Was it the tanks working in conjunction with the destroyers, and spotting and rolling those bunkers off the hill? That would be neat to see.
Yeah.
If I'm not an observer, I think I would go into the future. I would like to be there with my kids at the end. Really? Wherever the end, yeah. Wherever is there at their birth. Just want the thought of being there. If you can be the person, to shepherd them through life, that would be cool.
Yeah.
But the greatest advantage that you have in being a parent is you probably, as you've started to see friends pass and things like that, is you don't have to watch that. That's the one gift that you get if you get diagnosed with a life-ending disease. You guaranteed that you're not going to have to watch your kid go through something horrible.
Right.
But it would be nice to be able to
see how their life shakes out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't disagree. Do you have a favorite quote?
Favorite quote? Maybe something from Animal House.
I'll take things I wasn't expecting for 500, Alex.
I saw a quote on a park bench a couple years ago that I really liked. It said, a ship at port is safe, but ships were not meant to stay at port. I liked that.
Yeah. Yep, I agree.
I don't know who said that.
Yeah.
I read a quote by Tolstoy a couple days ago that really stuck. It said, if a book isn't worth reading twice, it's not worth even reading once.
That's good stuff. Do you have an EDC that you carry around town when you're just milling about?
An EDC?
Everyday carry, concealed.
Oh, and I have a flashlight.
You don't carry it?
No.
Not a pistol carrier? No. What flashlight is it?
I don't know.
You got it on you now?
Yeah.
You don't carry a knife or anything? No. Oh, just like a little pen light, huh?
Yeah.
Huh.
If I'm looking for something in the closet.
Not even a knife. I dig it. You're just that bad with your hands, I guess, huh?
I'm pretty fast. Do
you train
fast at running away?
No combatives. No. What do you have?
But for all the listeners, I'm deadly.
Yeah. So, pinky finger, fucking deadly move.
Yeah.
What time do you get up in the morning, and what's the first 3 hours look like?
So 4:30. That's my normal. So between 4 and 4:30 to start working. It depends what it depends where I am in the writing and research schedule. If I'm researching, I'll get up and I have a cup of coffee and I'll read for 10, 15 minutes just to get my head, because research is such a drag. And you're going through I'm going through reports most of the time, our archival material, so it sucks. But if I'm writing, I'm up, and as soon as I have coffee, I'm sitting down, and the night before I go to bed, if I'm writing, the night before I will read what I wrote, that day, and I will read it right before I go to bed, and I'll go to bed, and then as soon as I'll usually finish a sentence halfway through, not even finished, and then I'll wake up and immediately sit down and start writing. So those first 2 hours are all writing.
Yeah. Are you writing most of the time, like out of the year?
Right now, no, because right now I'm in research mode, which is brutal. I've been in research mode for a year now.
Of all of the years that you've been researching and writing based off of that, is there a singular piece of research literature that you've come across that has been the most surprisingly fascinating? Where it wasn't a drag and you're like, holy shit, I can't.
Oh no, yeah, I shouldn't say, all research. Research is one of those things where it's so seductive because you can keep finding things, and I found though that you have to stop. You have to start writing before you're done researching. Otherwise, you'll never be done researching. So you have to. I set a limit for myself. So whenever I'm working on a chapter, I work on a timeline first, then I move to note cards. So I'll build between a 40-page and 80-page timeline, just so I know, this is the universe that I'm dealing with. I know, what happened. And then all of that corroborative detail, this person said this, or this person was wearing a red shirt, that's all going into a pile of note cards. So once I have 2 to 4 inches of note cards and, 40 to 80 pages of the timeline, I know I'm ready to start a chapter. And the way you get all that material is you go to the archives and you take pictures, and you'll leave the archive with, between 2,000 and 3,000 images that you got to go home, print, and then go through. It's your time at the archive is so precious. You don't waste time actually going through the material at the archive because I live in Chicago. Most of the archives that I go to are not in Chicago, so I'm spending money on rental cars and hotels, and so your time is precious. I don't even stop to take a break and eat lunch or anything like that. It's a full put-out day. I say all that to say that when I was working on my chapter on Darby's Rangers and the Rangers at Cisterna, and if your listeners don't know, the raid on Cisterna is happens in World War II. It happens in the Italian campaign in early 1944, and it's still to this day the worst disaster in the history of American special operations. More American special operators are killed or captured in that event than in any other event in American history. And I was going through the archive, and I found a number of reports from the battle itself. And we have an actual transcript of Darby's communications with his battalion commander, who was trapped and cut off, and Darby's doing his best to get another battalion moved up to relieve them. And you have the entire transcript of everything that's being said between his battalion commander and Darby. And now like I said, you don't take breaks at the archive because the time is precious. That's the one time where I've stopped, and I just turned page after page, and I was, you're there with them as that whole battle was unfolding, and ultimately, wow. And I had to take a minute. I had to leave the archive.
No doubt. Wow. How many special operators were killed and captured?
We don't know.
Really?
So over 700 Rangers actually assault Cisterna. There's two battalions that actually make their way, from the starting line to Cisterna. They get cut off, and the 4th Battalion is trying to break through to get to them. So a number of casualties in the 4th. The KIAs and WIAs are very heavy in the 4th, but we don't know exactly how much how bad it was for 1st and 3rd battalions.
Wow!
Because so many of them were actually captured.
Yeah,
many of them, many were executed.
Yeah, it's brutal. Archive-wise, is there a top spot to go to, and what building is it? Forgive my ignorance.
No, it's okay. The crown jewel is the National Archives, NARA, in College Station, Maryland.
Oh, really?
That's the repository for all operational archives. Now there are some really good, smaller archives around too. The Gray Research Center at Quantico for the Marine Corps, the Army's Heritage and History Center in Carlisle, and the Army Archives there at Carlisle, which is not too terribly far from Gettysburg. So if you're trying to, they've got a good Army History Museum at Carlisle, and the staff there at the Army Archive are just the most helpful people ever.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was always a pleasure to do any sort of research there. And every archive has its own sort of culture, and the archivists are all a little bit different. At the Army Archive, they couldn't be more helpful. NARA in Maryland, that's very strict. That's very strict. So like they are. You got hall monitors that are going up and down the aisle, making sure that you're putting the classification tabs, every time you're taking a photo. And I think they give you one warning, and if you don't, if they have to give you another warning, you're escorted out.
Wow. Is it busy there? Like, is there a lot?
It's busy for it's like nerd busy. It's like a busy Starbucks.
It's a good place.
Or You're not.
It's a good place to get laid, then, brother.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Man, that's fascinating. I mean, again, I know that there are archives I've never really even thought about.
The Navy Yard Archive or the Naval Heritage and History Command at the Navy Yard. That's I have notes.
Yeah,
I have lots of notes. So.
I mean, is it like a public library where you can just go?
There's the Army has a library there. I don't think you have access to the library. The Gray Research Center, you have a world-class library, and Navy Yard, you have a library with quite a lot that you can access. So most of the oral history reports are accessible. You don't have to request them or anything like that.
So for like the National Archives, you have to put a form.
National Archives, at college, there's no books there. You would walk in and you would not recognize it as a library. You have to go in and you have to make formal requests. You have to get you've got to get a research card and certification. You got to go through an accrediting process, and then you actually put in your request for the day, and they'll roll a whole cart of boxes out. Now every time I've been to an archive, I've done a ton of pre-work on the computer. Gosh, I can't imagine anybody is interested in this, but I've done like if I'm spending a lot of time on their search engine. This is the folder that has the document that I want to find. This is the report of the Rangers at Cisterna. I have to get this report. This is the operational whatever. And you put in the request for that. It comes out in the box, and the folder is empty, or it's got one slim piece of paper in it that gives you no information. It's so disheartening. But what you've got, or what you have to get used to as a researcher, is look in the next box, look in the next folder. That's where the gold is. So every time you go in and you make that special request for that one special document that is going to, help you write that chapter, it ain't there.
Yeah.
But it's going to be in the, the adjacent folders, and you just got to, go in with some faith and hope. And
yeah. So it takes a ton of prep work before you even show up.
Yeah. And I had to learn all that. I didn't go in with any special knowledge.
I imagine pre-say 95. Doing that would be a multitude of more, or a lot more difficult, not having computers to be able.
I don't know how. Yeah, I'm not sure how you would. There are definitely advantages to, researching now. I'm terrified of what life is going to be like for researchers in the future. Like, how is anybody going to, write a sort of history that I wrote, that's based on, archival information, corroborative detail, information that was, recorded as close to the actual occurrence as possible. You're going to be overwhelmed. I mean, it's just a mass of material. Like if you're working on D-Day, there's the memoirs, and there's the battlefield itself, and there's the operational reports and everything like that. If you're trying to write, the Battle of Ramadi today, like, you're going to be overwhelmed with material.
Yeah. As you guys know, sleep is a huge component to recovery and really all aspects in life, and it's something that a lot of us have struggled with, for a lot of our lives, frankly. As you know, I've been a big proponent of Beam, which is a hot cocoa that you drink before you go to sleep, and it's helped tremendously in terms of hours of sleep maintained as well as the quality of sleep. Today, my listeners get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, which is their science-backed hot cocoa for sleep, and it's got no added sugar. Better sleep has never tasted better. As you know, other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess and just make you feel crappy, but Dream contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, and apigenin, also melatonin, to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/micdrop, all caps, all one word, and use code MicDrop, all one word, all caps, at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/micdrop and use code MicDrop for up to 40% off. So I want to tell you about this company, SLNT, that was kind enough to send me a couple of their products, and they've come in handy. A disturbing new way to steal your car is reportedly on the rise worldwide, and most of us don't know just how easy it is to become a victim. In fact, in the next 20 seconds, one of you could be the next target. It's been reported that in 2023 alone, over 1 million cars in the United States were stolen, and in many cases, it simply looked like an owner was getting into their car. To prove how easy it was, a UK reporter tested it earlier this year. All he needed was 2 small devices, a device no bigger than a tablet and a cell phone, to copy the car key's fob, even if it was inside a house, in less than 20 seconds. He was able to break into a luxury SUV and drive away. This type of keyless theft is one of the reasons why so many car owners wake up to find their cars simply gone, taken immediately to chop shops, or shipped out to foreign countries, never to be seen again. The crazy thing is this isn't just limited to your car. Similar technology can be responsible for data theft and could damage your phones and laptops too. To me, there's no other option. You must try to protect yourself, and the best way to start is with SLNT. Silence Faraday products help block all incoming and outgoing signals so no one can get their hands on your information. From key fobs to phones to laptops, simply place your device inside, close the sleeve, and that's it. You're off the grid and safeguarded from unauthorized access. Go silent today at slnt.com/micdrop to save 15% off plus free shipping on qualifying orders. Stay ahead of what's coming and help secure your privacy today. Again, that's slnt.com/micdrop for 15% off and free shipping on qualified orders. slnt.com/micdrop. I use the products and I love them. Guys, as you know, I work with a number of different products. One that's easily the most near and dear to my heart from a cause standpoint and a personal relation standpoint is Bubs Naturals. The hat on the coffee table sitting right in front of me belonged to Glenn Doherty. It was a John Deere hat that I gave him. He had it when he tragically passed in Benghazi, and I was fortunate enough to get it back from one of the co-owners of Buds. He sent it back to me to be able to keep. Bubs Naturals is a tribute to Glenn. He was one of everybody's, he was kind of that guy that was everybody's best friend. I met several people that considered him his best friend, and he was a guy that was impossible not to like, and just, caused happy waves that rippled through every community he was ever a part of. His nickname was Bub, and that's where Bubs Naturals comes from. But it's a lifestyle brand. It's inspired by Glenn. They give a ton to charity. They've donated over $200,000 to charitable causes since their inception in 2018. On Veterans Day, 100% of the proceeds go to the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation, which does phenomenal work helping active duty and children of lost active duty members go to college or scholarships that they've donated a ton, and they also are heavy into the recreation space of helping people do that, because that's what Bub was all about. They have collagen peptides, which I put into my morning routine every single morning. as well as the functional creamer / MCT oil that goes into it as well. They have hydrate or dielectric electrolyte drink mixes, which are great for pre-workout, during workout, and post-workout to get all the added sodium, potassium, magnesium, etc. that's required when you deplete it. And they now have Bub's Brew, which is a specialty organic coffee that is also very, very good. It's USDA organic, fair trade. It's Whole30 approved, which is the first time that's happened. It's free of yeast, mold, and aflatoxins. Small lot roasted, guaranteed fresh, and it tastes great. Biggest thing is Bub's is a family company. The way that they started is, again, super close to my heart, with him being one of my closest friends for a long time. And I just can't say enough good things about that company, of the product that they put out, why they started, what they give back to veteran communities and the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation. And I encourage you to go to bubs.com, and now there's a landing page specifically for Mic Drop listeners. Just enter the code Mike, M-I-K-E, all caps, and you get 20% off your first purchase at bubsnaturals.com. So that's www.bubsnaturals.com/Mike. And you can check out the Mic Drop landing page and go support an amazing cause. Have you, I guess, kind of tried or experimented with ChatGPT or any type of AI tools to do any of the research? Because one thing that I would worry about is how accurate it is. It's like once it's kind of put into that machine, it can be slanted. I mean, for that matter, you can train your AI research bot, if you will. Like you can steer it certain directions. And, the more questions you ask it, the more it kind of anticipates what you're. So it's like over time that has to kind of manipulate the results to where what's existing on hard copy now in archives, if that's built into the machine that is ChatGPT or AI, I don't know what I guess the term is. I know ChatGPT is a singular entity, but just that type of artificial intelligence machine that over time that it could be completely diluted or changed or what have you.
I don't know where any of the archives stand with full digitization of all their records. I know they're trying to get to that level, and AI is certainly going to help with that, but.
It would make me question the validity and accuracy of it once it's in there, though.
Well, I mean, the reports. I mean, if you're going into there are a few online archives that are pretty good. Like say Fold3, for instance. I used Fold3 quite a bit when I was, and that Fold3 has particularly for World War II, they've got a lot of operational reports in there. So my whole first chapter, which was on the Marine Corps Raiders, I was able to do from the comfort of my own home because I was able to find, the after-action report that all the submarine skippers wrote, the one that Carlson wrote, after, within days of him coming back. I think he actually wrote it on the submarine. All of that is available online. But so much of that, all of the other material, this material that we have produced over the course of our whole history, including all of the wars that we've been, that's all just in boxes. Yeah. And the idea that you're going to digitize everything, and then, I can't imagine a scenario where even AI is going, maybe be able to. I don't know.
To me, it's so vast and expansive that if you were to. Again, not even like just digital copies of it, but if that kind of transcribed and put into, because that's kind of how it is now, where like if you ask ChatGPT anything historically, explain the Battle of the Bulge, whatever. Like,
well, it's going to give you a good, but it's going to give you a description of the Battle of the Bulge, probably comparable to what's on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Which is, I find Wikipedia pretty helpful.
Yeah.
But, we don't read Wikipedia we humans like to connect with something, there's a type of book that I think we're attracted to that I don't think AI has been able to produce yet.
Yeah.
I think it takes a human and a human sensitivities to realize what's important and what, another human is going to respond to, to actually make a compelling book.
Yeah.
Like a friend of mine recently asked ChatGPT to write a paragraph about something in the voice of Ben Milligan, and the result was pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool that you can even do that. I do wonder if there's going to come a point in our lifetime where it does have that capacity to be able to
write the Ben Milligan paragraph?
Yeah, or just discern what's important or what's going to resonate with human beings or not. It's kind of frightening.
Yeah.
We'll all be out of a fucking job. Which, to me, there's a weird, not to get off on a tangent, but with automation, like there has to be a happy medium at some point where, like, if everything is so automated to where, the handful of business owners that own the automation of whatever these processes are, like you're going to put yourself out of business because you're not going to have any customers that can even buy the shit that you're selling because they're that broke. If everybody's out of a fucking job, it's like a weird kind of reverse chicken or the egg thing almost.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hopefully we can develop AI that will help us identify AI,
and not
created
kill
products.
everybody. Where are you originally from?
Indianapolis.
And siblings, like what was your childhood like?
I have an older brother, 4 years older. I have a younger brother, 3 years younger. Older brother's an FBI agent. My younger brother is a builder in Indianapolis, and my youngest sister is a speech pathologist in Ohio.
Oh wow! What did your parents do growing up?
My dad was a ear, nose, and throat specialist, head and neck surgeon. My mom was chief of staff.
Where at?
Indy. He had a practice in Anderson, Indiana.
Oh, okay.
And then he had a couple practices, one in Indy.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I guess I meant your mom, or is that?
Oh, my mom ran the house.
Oh, I got
She
you.
was
I got you. I've never heard it called chief of staff. I do like it though.
I don't know. I don't know what else to call it. I mean, homemaker is not sufficient, and she was
CEO of the house.
Yeah, she did everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. Any sports that you played growing up, or what was the hobbies? What did you do other than just being a kid?
Yeah, I ran cross country and track and played soccer. And I tried out for the 5th grade basketball team and got cut. And then I tried again 6th grade and also got cut. I think 10 people tried out. I think they were able to take 8 players, and I was one of the ones that got cut every year. Yeah, I have zero athletic ability.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a good trier.
Are you not coordinated?
I mean, I'm better now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my dad was a great dad, but we didn't play. My dad, it's funny because my dad loved sports. We didn't play a lot of ball sports. We grew up on a farm. So when my dad was a kid, he took a personality test and it said, what should I be when I grow up? And it said you should be either a doctor or a farmer. So he became a doctor and bought a farm. So I grew up on a farm. I didn't play any sports as a young guy, and we didn't play a lot of sports in the yard or anything like that. I ran around playing Navy SEALs.
Really?
Yeah, like an idiot.
Even at a young age, you knew what they were and that you wanted to do that?
From a young age, I knew that my grandfather, who I was very close to, was a Marine, and then at the end of at the end of Okinawa, he had volunteered for the UDT. So I knew what the UDTs were, and I knew what the SEAL teams were at a young age.
That's cool.
But so I didn't come into high school with a lot of athletic ability. I was, and I didn't leave high school with any athletic ability. I was a good trier, and I set a few running records, but other than that, nothing.
Fastest mile time?
I think 4:39.
Oh wow!
And I was, but I stopped doing that sophomore year. I focused on the 800. That
is arguably the worst race in all of track and field.
The 8 or the
800?
Yeah, 8's brutal. 8's brutal. I should have done it in college, but I just didn't have the courage. I was topped out at 2 flat my senior year, and I couldn't. And I was puking after every race, and I was like, I can't. The thought of doing this at at a collegiate level. I couldn't bring myself to doing that.
Yeah, it's a.
But I was so bad at sports and had such little hand-eye coordination. It was known throughout the SEAL teams when I was serving. So much so that one of the guys that I went through buds with was Pete Skehan, who is he's a commander in a police commander or maybe lieutenant in Oakland, I want to say now. Great SEAL. But we were in a gunfight in Iraq once, and he was behind a wall, pinned down, and he was running out of ammo. I was working the helicopters behind another wall, so I had more ammo. And Pete yells to me, and he says, "Hey, give me some, throw me a mag." So I pull a magazine out of my kit, and I throw it. He's no further than your producer over there, and it lands exactly halfway between us both. And we're in the middle of this firefight, bullets skipping all around, and Pete looks up at me like, and I can see the disgust in his eyes. And instead of throwing him another mag, I was ashamed, and so I was crawling out, to get this mag so I can throw the, finish the rest of the way. And the whole time I'm crawling, to this mag, I'm thinking to myself, if I die right now because my dad didn't play enough ball sports with us.
Oh, that's fucking great. So how did it pan out? Did you go grab it and throw it the rest of the way?
Yeah, no, I got about halfway to the mag. 2 bullets skipped off the ground in between my arms. It's like, fuck that. I backed up and threw him another one.
That's great. Yeah, that's wild. So growing up, playing Navy SEALs, was there a particular point in your childhood where you knew definitively that's what you wanted to do and went and did it?
I told my parents when I was 12. And it initiated a series of knockdown, drag-out fights.
Really?
In the family, yeah.
So neither of them were particularly supportive?
Outside of, the World War II, parents, that they had served, they didn't know anybody that had ever served in the military. So, they didn't know much about what the SEAL teams were. And so, going into junior high, I was adamant, I'm not going to college. I'm going to, join, the Navy and become a SEAL. They were, naturally skeptical, and when it impacted my grades, they were concerned, as I think most normal parents would be, and they did their best to, push me into other things. And I was a bright kid, but I was not studious, I guess. I wasn't a good student. So they're just, like every parent, you're just trying to expose kids to as much as possible to get them interested in something. My dad was, I think as a parent, you give what you got. If you got sports, you give sports. If you got, history, you give history. My dad, he was a doctor, so he gave us, what he had, and he was. From an early age, I was going to the hospital with him. He would wake me up in the middle of the night, if he had a bad accident that he had to go respond to or something like that. And this was before HIPAA and everything. He'd wake me up and say, Benji, do you want to go watch this surgery I'm about to do? And 9 times out of 10, I would say yes, because I loved watching my dad work. I loved, doing the fast drive to the hospital in the middle of the night. And I loved watching whatever he was going to do. And I still have great memories of, some of the surgeries and procedures that he did. So I think they, and based on that interest, I think they thought that I would eventually follow him into medicine, take over the practice and everything like that. But I knew, I just didn't have it. I wasn't interested, and I wanted, this other thing. So from an early age, I learned to not talk about it.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything to anybody. I just, locked it away and knew that when I got through, high school, that's what I was going to do. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't until there was one night in my senior year that I didn't come home. I went right to the recruiter's office, and I was ready to sign up. And my mom must have known something. I don't know, because I didn't tell anybody I was going to the recruiter. but I was ready. I was in the recruiter's office. I was ready to sign. I had the papers in front of me, and the recruiter, to his credit, he stopped me and he goes, "Do you know her?" And I turn around and there's this Garfield cat on the wall, sobbing her eyes out,
Yeah.
And so I
That's wild.
walked outside. We had an adult conversation. She said, "If you go to college for 1 year and you don't like it, you'll have our blessing and you can do whatever you want." I think they knew what would happen. I agreed. I went to college and, found all these history courses, and I was hooked. So
That's fascinating. After that 1 year of college you went in?
no, after that 1 year of college, I didn't realize what college was. I didn't know that you could take classes that you wanted. I was so uninterested in, higher education and, anything else. I had done zero research. I went to a state school. I went to Purdue, majored in history because that was the only topic I liked. But when I got there, my first class was, taught by. My first class was a class on World War II. It was I was like, I'm interested in World War II. I'd like to go to this class, and I went to the class, and the professor walked out, and he opened the class, and he had this thick German accent. He's like, "Oh boy, buckle up. This is going to be interesting."
Yeah.
And it took probably half the semester before I realized this is Gunther Rothenberg. He's one of the foremost historians in Napoleonic warfare, and he'd been a Jewish refugee that had fled Germany, joined the British Army, and become a commando. And he'd fought through World War II, and then he had left and joined the Palmach in Israel, and then he had left Israel and he'd come to the United States and joined the American Army,
Wow.
or American Air Force, fought in Vietnam. And then he'd become a historian. I was like, these are the characters that I was meeting at Purdue. I was like, okay, this is
That's legit.
it was interesting.
That's amazing. Man, what a badass.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy, and he was the hub around which the Purdue's military history department revolved.
Wow.
When he left, that department ceased to exist. But yeah, he was a fascinating guy.
Yeah. So I assume then you graduated from Purdue and
Graduated, yep. Graduated and then enlisted. Tried to go the officer route. Went. I was with the OCS recruiter and doing the PFTs or the PTs for better part of 6 months to a year. Trying to get my scores good and get my package together. And when they finally they came back and they turned me down, I was beside myself. I didn't know what to do. So I had a grown-up conversation with my dad, and my dad was like, "Well, this is what you want to do. There's another option," and he drove me over to the enlisted recruiter, and I was gone 2 weeks later.
was that humbling at all to not make that and go the lowly enlisted route?
I think it was more humbling for my parents. I didn't care.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I didn't have any sort of legacy that I had to live up to or anything like that. There was no one in my family had ever been an officer, so I didn't feel any special, calling or burden to do that. Man, I didn't. No, I didn't. It wasn't humbling. It was when I got to boot camp in those first 48 hours. I did have some misgivings. I remember thinking, is like when I was standing there, like, what have you done?
I had the exact same experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a...
Did you go to college before?
No, but in terms of showing up, I graduated high school at 17 and had to wait until I turned 18 later in the summer and then went to boot camp right after that. But
then went to Buds right away?
Yeah, so I was 18 in Buds, but just in boot camp, I remember, I had this like couple year build up to, expecting, imagining, dreaming about what boot camp and SEAL training was going to be like, reading all the Marcinko books and whatever. And and then I got there and I was like, the fuck what was I thinking? And, it was just like, it was not what I expected, and there was a brief period in that first 2 or 3 days where I was like, I think I made a mistake fucking joining the Navy, and they're like, yeah, it doesn't fucking matter. You're here. So, and then, within a few days it subsided, but yeah, I had a similar thought process for sure.
I had, the days before I left for boot camp, my grandpa took me to an event at the fairgrounds, in the Indiana State Fairgrounds, where I can't remember what it was, but it was military oriented. I remember I met Sammy Davis, who was an Indiana Medal of Honor winner. It was well known. Shook his hand, and after I met him, there was a speaker who was on the stage, and I went out and just sort of milled out. There were probably 200 people standing. There was nobody sitting, but he was giving a speech, and it was Dick Marcinko.
Really?
Yeah, I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, this is the guy whose book I read that got me here.
Yeah.
Little did I know how important that book would become later in my life.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so kind of a funny story. When I was in A school, which was at Dam Neck, he was doing a book signing at a little bookstore in Virginia Beach. And so, of course, we all went. And, we wait in line, we get up there, and we're all like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed fucking 18-year-olds that are in awe of this, total badass, whatever. And, of course, like dipshits, we were all like, we're in the Navy and we're going to Buds. He's like, is that right? And he's like, well, what Buds class are you going to be in? I said, 214. And he was like, yeah, you mean fucking DD 214, you loser. You're not going to make it. Get the fuck out of here. And I was just like, holy shit.
That's pretty quick, though, DD 214. That's
pretty
good.
Yeah. I mean, he's pretty sharp. But I was just like, holy fuck, he didn't give a shit. Coincidentally, and I guess similarly funny, is years later, I was being interviewed after my first book came out, and he and I were on the we were both being interviewed by a media outlet, and I shared that story with him, and he was just like, "Holy fuck, I don't even remember saying that," but it was just kind of that same thing that we were talking about before we aired about maybe getting a couple of our Buds instructors here on Mic Drop here in the.
How was he in the personal
on the interview? Or just
no, just when you were talking to him, how was he receptive? Was he
not really? He was pretty salty and dismissive.
That's a shame.
Yeah, he was not particularly friendly. Now, granted, I think the first thing we said to him was, "We're in the Navy and we're going to go be SEAL."
No, not in that encounter. When you were on the later in life.
Oh, he was great.
He was great.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. I mean, he was super kind and just brimming with humility, and I mean, he was a very kind guy, and. Yeah, it was the polar opposite of when I met him before.
Interesting.
But this was probably 12 years ago or so.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, I guess one question before we get into the SEAL career. Was your grandfather, was he in UDT?
No, not technically. So he was in a mountain artillery unit in the Marine Corps. When the Battle of Okinawa concluded after mop-up operations, planners were anticipating that they were going to have to do the whole thing over again on the two main islands of Japan. And for the main island and then for Honshu, they had two separate operations that they were planning. And so at that point, there were, I want to say 34 UDT, so 3,400 UDT frogmen that were that's what the U.S. Navy had in its inventory for beach clearances for two major operations, and they'd used almost that many in the combined operations in the South Pacific and in Okinawa. So they didn't have enough. The Navy didn't have enough folks that could pass the swim requirements to make enough frogmen. So the Navy, when the UDT were created in 1943, they were initially created as multi-service units. So UDT 1 and UDT 2 are both Army, Marine Corps, and Navy. So they were joint units. It wasn't until the Navy takes the whole program after the Marshall Campaign ahead of the Marianas that they make the UDT an entire Navy organization. Now in 1945, April, that's when they opened the ranks of the UDT back up to the Army and the Marine Corps. He was a Marine, so he volunteered for the UDT. They don't want to ship all these guys back to Maui where UDT training is, so they create a schoolhouse right there in Okinawa. And they put these guys through a pressure cooker's worth of training right in Okinawa for, UDT operations. So he wasn't he wasn't put into a UDT. He was one of the augmentees for the UDTs.
Did you talk to him a lot about that growing up?
Yeah, I would. If I had known that I was going to write a history about this, I would have talked to him a lot more about it.
Yeah,
we talked all the time, though. He was. He died in 2016.
Oh wow!
I still have a hard time talking about him just because he was so close and because he was the one that got me interested in all of this.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't not just his personal history, which I thought was really cool growing up, but also like he kind of knew me, and knew my interests because he had probably the same interests. He was probably should have been a writer himself. He was in the window and awning business, had his own company, but he, his hobby was, reading American history. And would in his later years, he wrote, several articles for the Indianapolis Star that got printed, and I still have them framed, in my office, and they're excellent.
Yeah.
He was a great writer.
Wow.
But I didn't know, like growing up, like we would share books, and I would read a book and give it to him. He would read a book, he would give it to me, and we were always corresponding. My entire when he finally did pass away, my brother found in his closet, he found hundreds of letters that we had exchanged, and we were in our own. We didn't realize it at the time, but we were in our own, private 2-person book club for 20 years, talking about these books. When I was on deployment, he would send me books. He would, and most of them he stole from the Madison County Library. So I would get these books in the mail, and I'd open up the front cover, and it'd be stamped with the library. He would just go into the library, he'd walk out with them, and he was,
That's classic.
Passed away when he was 102.
Wow, man, what a special memory. Yeah. Did he attend your BUD/S graduation?
He did, yeah.
How special was that? Pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Unfortunately, my grandfather was also in the Navy. Not unfortunately, but unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it to my graduation. I wish he had. But you go to BUD/S, you go through Class 235. We were talking a little before rolling, and it sounded like swims were a difficult point of contention for you.
Yeah, I wasn't fast. I had this. Training for BUD/S, I just, I swam every day, but I didn't swim fast. I just thought all of the swimming was going to be endurance type swimming. I didn't realize like how. It was not. I never swam competitively before I went to BUD/S. So when I got there, I was the slowest swimmer to get through Hell Week.
Really?
So there were slower swimmers than me, but they all quit.
Mm.
So when we got through Hell Week and I looked around, I was like, "Oh,
now I'm the slowest."
Damn it! So they did their best to pair me with faster swimmers. So
yeah, drag you along.
And the weekends were when everybody else was recovering, I was at the pool. And would not have gotten through training if it hadn't been for Master Chief Rick Nepper. Rick Nepper was, I don't know if he was there when you were there, but he was doing swim classes for, BUD/S students on the weekend.
Same here.
And he was another guy that I wish I had, spent some time in BUD/S getting to know. He was just the, crusty old team guy that, told me to, keep my head closer to my arm.
Kick, stroke, glide, motherfucker.
Yeah, it was, but he, 20 years or 15 years later, I'm going through all the after action reports for deployment or for platoons that he was in. I wish that I'd talked to him.
It's weird, and I agree. Like when I was there and seeing him do instruction, you're kind of like, he was a SEAL to a certain extent. I mean, granted, he's an older guy.
Yeah, he's an older guy. Yeah,
but still, just his personality, though. I mean, not even from a physical standpoint. He just didn't like. He was a super kind, laid back, just helpful dude. And then, you hear about the things that he was a part of, and you're like, holy shit.
He was the SEAL.
Yeah.
And he was on the, He was on the Bob Carey Medal of Honor mission. I mean, he climbed those cliffs, alongside him.
Yeah.
Yeah, remarkable.
Yeah. Anything out of the ordinary in your Bud's journey that is worth mentioning?
Not for me. I went through pretty smoothly. There was nothing.
Didn't get rolled back or anything?
No. Once I got through the swim issue, the most remarkable thing that happened was obviously we had our class leader died in Hell Week.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
What was his name?
John Scopp.
Yeah,
He was the class leader, but he was also my boat crew leader.
What happened?
Well, it was Wednesday night, Thursday morning, and we were in the pool. We had just done a med check, and we came out of the med check, and we were doing a caterpillar swim across the pool. And I had been the trail guy in that caterpillar swim. In my Hell Week brain, we did the first lap and we lost. So I looked at Scopp, and Scopp had been, progressively declining, through Hell Week. He'd been he was the biggest guy in the class. But as Hell Week, progressed, he had more fluid, more and more fluid in his lungs, and the boat crew was, we were carrying him more and more. But he was still there, and he was, still commanding, and still had, this, big personality. So I think the instructors were, as I've understood it, they were just waiting to get him a couple more hours, get him over that hump, and then they were going to, roll him forward. And I'd run past him. We were at the pool, and I'd run past him, and I saw him. He was, hooked up to the intubator. Was that what I call it? I think that was the, apparatus they attached to you. And was getting the fluid pulled out of his lungs, and he was going back into training. And we had done one lap in the pool, and I had been the tail guy, and I knew that I was a slow swimmer. So I looked at Scopp, and I knew he was a good swimmer. And for whatever reason, my Hell Week brain was like, he's got these big, huge, flipper-sized feet. Like, he's going to be able to kick for us. So I said, hey, why don't you take why don't you be the last man so you can kick? And he said, okay. And that was the last time anyone spoke to him. We got about halfway across the pool to the deep end. And the whole time, I'd been, I felt him, like, slipping through my legs. And I remember at the end, I had my heels on him. I was just trying to, because it's like, if I can keep my heels on him, then the instructors won't yell at us, and they'll at least, we'll look like we're, still a cohesive boat crew. And then all of a sudden he slipped through my legs and he went to the bottom, and I broke free of the rest of the chain. And I, instead of yelling, man down or down man, I yelled help. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get nailed for that. And I dove down, me and an instructor dove down and pulled him up. And then they faced us toward the wall, and they worked on him for a while.
So was it ever conclusive as to, was it just a combination of fluid in the lungs, pneumonia, and like he just went under and ended up like shallow water blackout, drown, or what? I mean, what? I never
heard. I heard lots of stories that I wouldn't like to commit to.
Yeah.
The airwaves, but I think it was a combination of things. But I think as I understand it, he pushed himself
too hard.
I mean, it wasn't his fault. I mean, he was a hard guy. And
yeah.
When another normal person would have stopped, he did not.
Yeah. At what point, or did they communicate that to you guys during Hell Week that he had passed away?
They told us that night,
yeah.
And they pulled us. They had us in the CO's conference room. They pulled our boat crew into the CO's conference room, not the entire class. They sent the class to the classroom to sleep on the cots with all the folks that were in there who had quit. So they didn't know who had quit and who hadn't.
Oh wow!
But they sent the boat crew to the conference room, to meet with the chaplain. And I remember the chaplain talking to us, and then I think I probably woke up, a few minutes later. Like, they're trying to talk to us and counsel us, and we were exhausted. We fell asleep at the conference table.
Yeah,
I do remember Goggins talking though.
Oh really?
Goggins was, Goggins was Goggins even then, and
yeah.
he was having a loud conversation with the chaplain. At least I either dreamed that or it happened. I don't know.
So he was in your class?
Goggins, yeah. And he was in that boat crew.
Oh, wow.
No, he wasn't in the boat crew, but he somehow managed to get into the conference room. He wasn't in the boat crew. That's right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah.
How did you react, or how did you guys react? I guess. I mean, I know at that point in Hell Week, you're pretty delirious.
I mean, there was. I didn't know how to react.
Yeah.
I was. It was emotional. I mean, I remember, having a few moments, but you're back to training.
Did it impact your class at all? Like, was there a kind of a somber feeling that was felt? Or
oh yeah, it was. And we had to, immediately go from that to a funeral, and then immediately go from that back to training. Wow. We didn't get a walk week. We just we were back to kicking. Yeah.
Wow. Do you have a favorite Goggins story from Buds that you can share?
I can't share them.
Really?
Yeah, I would offline. I can share them. I've got some funny Goggins stories.
What's that? Can you share why you can't share them?
Oh gosh, I like Dave. Like, I wish.
I've never even met the guy. Like, I don't.
I mean, but he's the same person.
Yeah.
We ended up not getting along towards the end of training. I mean, everybody's getting on everybody's nerves at that point, but he was just a big personality. Like, and if you weren't as tough as Dave, you weren't tough enough to be a SEAL.
Yeah. Have you talked to him since, Buds?
In passing a few times while I was still in the teams, I would see him. He was at Buds so much. Anytime you would come back through, Buds for whatever reason. You'd often, run into him and have a 30-second awkward conversation.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys, I wish I could talk to him. I mean, we were friends in Buds.
Yeah.
In fact, my dad would come in, at the end of every phase, and have guerrilla med checks.
Really?
So guys didn't have to go to medical and get looked at. So
that's cool.
Dave had if I remember right, he had an inguinal hernia. That my dad would come in and check out, and my dad, being very, antiseptic and procedural, he'd be like, "Yeah, you gotta just stuff it back in there."
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have him on the show. Honestly,
it'd be great.
I don't think he would ever come on, but
I don't even think I bothered, sending him a book. We have since we had a. For the D-Day monument that we put up. Have you heard about that? We put it. After the book came out, we went on. We had a tour, a World War II Museum sponsored tour that the World War II Museum and the SEAL Museum partnered together and did a D-Day tour.
Oh, wow.
And I got brought over there to help lead the tour. To do the landing beaches and all these various other areas of interest for special operations, and it was a week-long tour where you stay in a chateau and incredible meals and but in the course of that tour we were looking around and it's like D-Day is the to date it's still the most important day in the history of naval special warfare. It's the day we lost the most guys in a single event. It's the event that validated Hell Week. I mean, Hell Week was created for D-Day, and without D-Day, that training would not have been validated. Thus, it would not have been transferred to the UDTs in the Pacific. Thus, naval special warfare wouldn't exist. So it's an important place in our history. So while we were there, talking with some of the older Vietnam GWAT era frogmen, we were like, we should really have a monument here, to commemorate what the NCDUs did. Like, gosh, we should. And 18 months later, we didn't just have a monument. We had we created after millions of dollars, and I don't know how many, countless numbers of meetings we had, but we built a monument over there for NSW.
That's awesome.
And it was very expensive to do, and I think there were, guys were reaching out to their classes to try and, put, to contribute. I think you had to contribute $10,000 to get onto the donor stone. So like, my class, considering, how, this monument probably wouldn't have happened without the book, without that tour, without, all the meetings that I did to, make this happen. I was like, 235 should be recognized for this. It took, several weeks to find all the guys in my buds class, but we managed to put an email together and say, hey, got all the guys. The only guy that we couldn't find was Goggins.
Really?
The one guy who's, the most accessible, the most out there, was the one guy that we couldn't reach, but he finally, as I understand it, he did contribute to the final cost. So we got 235 on the monument. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
what a cool story. You graduate buds. What SEAL team did you go to?
4.
Team 4. And at that time,
just gave a talk to 4. It was really cool.
Oh, really?
First time I've been back there.
Oh, that's neat. At that time, it was after the Force 21. They weren't specializing in South America anymore, or were they?
No, they weren't. It was we were destined for Europe.
Yeah. How many deployments did you do there?
1 there and then 1 at 5.
Okay. I guess the Team 4 deployment, did you go to Europe?
1.5, yeah.
You deployed to Europe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you spend more time sightseeing than fucking doing anything else going there, being such a World War II buff?
I did. I mean, I was, if I had not been so resentful that we were missing the wars, I would have spent a lot more time. But I was, like everybody else, I was, anxious to, get, to either Iraq or Afghanistan. And, I didn't take advantage of it in the way I should have. If it had been a follow-on deployment or something like that, I would have enjoyed it more.
Was it all like fleet exercises and shit there?
There was a lot of fleet exercises. We ended up going to support the evacuation of our assets from Liberia. I don't think we actually evacuated everything, but we did all the hydrographic surveys and everything beforehand.
Yeah. And actually pulling the trigger on that, did you guys pull the trigger at all, or was it?
No. There was it was a surreal experience. We had about a week's worth of various missions, creeping around and doing these various almost exclusively maritime operations. And the last one, was a totally overt hydro done in the middle of the day, right offside the U.S. Embassy, which is right on the coast there in Monrovia. And there were about 10,000 Liberians on the beach, and a CNN crew. And
it was pretty sneaky.
Yeah, I think so. Rob O'Neill was on the beach. He was the beach security while we were out there. And I think one of the everybody called Rob at the time. They called him Ross. And there were the ribs out there, and I think one of the CNN reporters, very cautiously approached Rob and his, sunglasses and his M4, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, what is that? Is that a rib out there?" And Rob turns around and he goes, "No, it's called a Ross."
That's great.
Yeah, but I was the, I was the closest to the beach on that one, and it was a real heavy surf break. And so I had my lead line and everything, and I was getting just destroyed by the surf as I was trying to stay online with everybody else. At one point, I'm wrapped around my lead line. I'm trying to mark depth and everything like that, and I see the wave coming, and I'm trying to cut out of everything, trying to cut out of my line and everything. And before I know it, this wave is, bearing down on me, and there's only one thing I can do. I can't take the knife, and I can't put it back in my sheath. So what do?
Drop the knife.
Right in your teeth.
Oh shit!
So at some place, somewhere out there, there's a CNN photo of me, doing the frogmen, swim through the surf with a knife in my teeth.
Dude, that's amazing. I mean, that's like straight out of the logo, right?
Yeah, right.
Same as
if only I could tan and was better looking, it'd be a great,
my dumb ass, I said drop the knife. Fuck, what was I thinking? I'm fired. I'm firing myself. Pulling my own trident. All right, so you come back from that, you end up crossing country, which is not usual.
I got out. I got out. I had
When you went to Team 5?
Yeah, I had some family stuff. I completely got out. Did contracting for about nine months. Some of it overseas, most of it in the States, teaching BBSS. When I got situated on the West Coast, I got back in. Went to Team 5.
Oh, wow. Okay. Did you have to go back through SQT or anything? Or
No,
because it was
I was only
short
out. I was
time?
out so short. Yeah.
All right.
And
So
then
you
deployed to Habanilla.
at what year were you there?
06, 07.
So pretty hot time to be there. Can you kind of walk us through that deployment in terms of, I guess, starting with, and this is a question I ask everybody prior to any combat deployments is, and I'm shocked at how few times it ever has any type of answer other than, no, not really. Did they ever sit you down and say, hey, that this is where we're going, this is why we're here, this is kind of the 30,000-foot view of what we're trying to accomplish, this is how it fits into the overall scheme of the war? Is there any of that relayed to you guys?
No. I think there was the closest thing we got to a pre-deployment presentation was they sat us down for like a 4-hour lecture by Dave Grossman.
Oh, yeah, on combat, on killing.
Yeah, which is the most peculiar presentation I've ever.
Really?
Now that I give presentations back to the SEAL teams, the thing that I always think is don't be like Dave Grossman.
A lot of markers involved, right?
Oh my gosh,
Isn't he a fucking throwing markers?
he was peculiar.
Yeah.
I remember, one guy asked a question while he was in the middle of his presentation. He stopped the presentation to say, I won't take questions. Like, okay.
Wow.
Undercuts your message a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we had I think a pretty good sense of what we were getting into. I mean, there was we had, Mark Lee had been killed, before, in the final months of our work up there. So we knew that we were, heading, into some potential, we were going to a war. And then right before we deployed, the whole team turned out for Mikey Mansour's funeral. And, we knew,
So you were at that funeral?
Mm-hmm.
So was I. Shit, what are the odds?
Yeah. Went to Danny's afterwards. And
Yeah. Probably ran into you there.
Sure.
All right, so I guess once you got there, then was it all just kind of the same actionable intelligence on the ground, DAs based off of that type stuff in conjunction with whatever intel you were gathering from big military sources?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was a comm guy, part-time JTAC in the platoon, so I was, focused more on, getting fires together, and I don't think I had a great operational understanding. I think I probably had a good operational understanding compared to others because I was, contributing a lot to, planning slides and things like that. But as far as, with the overall scheme of the war, I don't think I had a great, strategic handle on anything at that point.
Yeah.
I think a lot of, the experiences that I had, went on to inform, later understanding. But it wasn't until I came back from that deployment. It was probably on that deployment that I really started to understand how little I understood. Again, that's what probably initiated this, I don't know, whatever this is, this
Thirst for knowledge?
Yeah, just like how do we get here and like how do we, so I came out of that deployment. So like one of the last missions that we were on, we were doing a, what do you call it? Sniper Overwatch. We'd had a few of these where we'd tried to get in, get set up, and we'd either gotten ambushed or one thing hadn't been effective. One mission where we had been effective, we were supporting a Marine patrol. And we had set up a few sniper overwatches in a town that was just to the east of Ramadi, sort of like a rest and relaxation town for the insurgency. So we knew that they were there. We hadn't been very good at finding them in the past, so we had crept in on boats, snuck into abandoned houses, so we didn't really upset the family or upset a family order or anything like that. So nobody really knew we were there. Marines got contacted. They were pinned down by a sniper team. So we had one of our two elements displaced to go find the sniper team. Right about the same time they were ready to, go track down these snipers. The sniper team comes out of an alleyway, track suited up and everything, and our guys, killed all of them. We were at another location, just waiting. We figured the firefight was over, and I was just settling. I was just sitting down, behind a wall, getting ready to take a short nap, when I heard our corpsman, Jason Guerrero. He an SDV one guy. He goes, "That guy have a gun?" I immediately popped up, ran over to the wall, and just cranked off a 40 mic. It's like, recon by fire. And immediately, as soon as the grenade exploded, I was forced back by PKM fire. Just drove us all back. We were under contact. We didn't know how many. And one of our guys was pretty quickly, Mark Robbins, he was shot through the head. It actually went through his eye and came out the back of his head. So we were in a bad way. We had the assistant ground force commander and the platoon chief were on the roof, and they were pinned down. So we were trying to, not only suppress the ambush, but also to get, follow-on reinforcements. I couldn't get any of the aircraft to come down. So finally, there was one Marine, I don't know if he was a battalion commander at the time, but he wasn't in the patrol of the Marines that had been pinned down. He was still at the TOC. He had managed to grab 2 Humvees, and he took them up on this road that was, it was the IED alley. So he had just, 4 guys in Humvees, and they braved this road, got up, put their guns between, the ambush and us, and we were able to get a helo to land, and I was the only one that I was able to convince to come down. The Cobras wouldn't come down. And managed to, get our wounded guy, on the helicopter, and he was evacuated. He lived. Mark Robbins. He's a detective in Lake County now.
I mean, holy shit! How did he survive that? Just, a PKM round through the fucking eyeball.
Yeah. So me and Jason Guerrero, the medic, we were probably the first ones to actually pull him off this roof. Tim Sulik had drug him to the edge of the Tim Sulik and Mitch Hall had managed to drag him to the edge of the roof, and then me and Guerrero managed to get him off the roof and get him down. And I'm doing everything I can. Just like they tell you in medical training, you encourage guys, make sure they know they're okay and everything. So I see the hole in the back of his head, and I can hear him talking. So I'm doing everything you're supposed to do. I'm telling him, you're gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be okay. We're gonna get you out of here. All the rest. And then I flip him over, and I see his eyeball hanging out of his head. And I said, "Oh my God!" Man, it's like, "Oh, you're okay."
That's fucking nuts, man.
And
how did he live? Do you have any idea?
Well, he didn't have a lot up there to begin with.
He was all dead space.
Yeah, no, he.
Wow. I'm assuming he's blind in that eye.
Yeah, the eye's gone. So the eye was destroyed. Most of the hearing in that ear was destroyed. I think all the hearing in that ear is destroyed. He, I don't know. It took a long time, but pathways rebuild, and he was, he's an excellent detective, excellent SWAT team leader.
That's incredible.
He managed to walk to the helicopter, and there was one point in the firefight's still going on. I had set him on a pile of rocks next to the wall. It was out of fire. And it was on the second story of this building, and he was just on a pile of just rubble. And guys are in another room, and they were yelling at Mark, and Mark, back up, you're going to get hit. And he was just sitting on the rocks very quietly, a bandage across his head. And he picks up a bunch of rocks. They go back, they go back to dealing with the firefight. Mark takes the rocks and just whips them at the guys that were just yelling at him. And they're like, "We're taking fire from the other way." And I was like, "No, we're okay. Mark's just throwing rocks at you."
Man, that's wild. How did that? Did you help get him loaded on the bird? And then
no, he walked. So I was still dealing with the firefight. The other team had managed to run up to our position. Plus the Marines were out front. So funny because years later, when I was coming up with part of the reason that I wrote this book was an effort, to understand that day, not just that day, but other days. I got out in 2010, and 2009. I got out in 2009. I was doing some reserve stuff until 2010 was really the last time that I left San Diego and I left the SEAL teams for good. A year after that, 2 events happened. So 2011, biggest event in the war on terror, the killing of Osama bin Laden. 3 months after that, the largest loss of life in the entire war in Afghanistan, or the war on terror, happens with the downing of Extortion 17. Both of these events, involved naval special warfare, and both of these events were more than 600 miles away from the closest saltwater. I compared those events to, this event that I had experienced, Navy SEALs, fighting an inland war. How did this happen? How did the Navy, create a unit with this breadth of operational, experience or operational? How do we get an operational mandate this big? Where the Marines, we're ahead of the Marines. We're pushing beyond, even what the Marines consider their operational area. And as I was thinking through that, and as I was, coming up with this idea, I want to write a history book. I went to the SEAL Museum and I convinced them to let, I wasn't an author or anything like that, but I managed to convince them to let me into their archives to see if I could dig around and see if there was any sort of book there that I might be able to write. And I was going through World War II documents, and I found this one document that was written in the Vietnam War. It shouldn't have been filed where it was, but it was just there. And it was written by a RAND researcher who had been trying to understand that very same question. He'd been a former Force Recon Marine, and he was trying to understand how the SEALs had developed into this, land warfare force in Vietnam. And he didn't have a good answer for it, so he asked the question but didn't really satisfy the answer. But it was this document that kind of stuck in my head for a long time. And it wasn't until, many years later that I realized that this document was written by a guy named Francis Bing West, he ultimately became a pretty famous author. But it was his son that was the Marine that came to our rescue in Iraq.
Really? Dude, what are the odds on that?
Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, are you a man of faith? Do you believe in destiny and things like that? Do you think that was...
I don't think that things like that happen for an accident or are accidental. So yeah, I think there's something. I don't know what, but
Yeah, that's remarkable. Was that firefight the most intense one of the deployment?
Yeah.
How did it end? How did you guys finally finish it?
Once we got Mark in the helicopter, then we went through the town, hunting, and we ended up taking another building and just waiting until nightfall, and a TF-160 came in for us.
Was it as you were taking that building or leading up until that point, was it pretty heavy gunfire exchange?
Yeah, I mean, off and on, it was kinetic.
Yeah,
coming across. Yeah.
Any other gunfights from that deployment that are worth sharing?
The one that I think is the funniest is we were ambushed on the boats. The movie Act of Valor. The gunboat. I think that was based off of one of the missions that we were on. It was we were on the Euphrates River going down and saw what looked like suspicious folks on the riverbank. As we got closer, they initiated an ambush. It was a four AK-47 ambush. AK-47s have approximately 30 rounds in their magazines. So at most they were firing 120 rounds at us, before they had to reload. I think we unloaded more than 10,000 rounds on them from the boats. The intel that we got afterwards is we killed one, and one dropped dead from a heart attack. So
the other two squirted, huh?
Yeah.
10,000 rounds for
10,000. 10,000 rounds will make you have a heart attack. 10,000 rounds in about 45 seconds.
Man, crazy. The half-ass mag throw, was that either of those two?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean that was the first gunfight that you told us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Man, that's wild. How would you characterize that deployment overall? I mean,
I thought it was the quintessential SEAL deployment.
Yeah.
Lots of intel driven capture kill.
Was there a biggest success mission that you went on?
And there were lots of I don't know if they were HVTs, but they were the uneventful capture kill type mission.
Like you guys would go in and from an element of surprise standpoint, we're so good that no shots were fired.
Absolutely.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Like dozens
explosive
of them.
breach and you're and that I think it's we tend to give credit to these more dramatic missions that happen when the bread and butter of the SEAL teams was that the uneventful
Yeah, if no shots were fired, that means you did your job right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the perfect mission.
Yeah. As you were wrapping that deployment up and eventually came home, did you know at that point, A, that you were going to get out, and B, that you wanted to write the book, or what was the catalyst? Like, was there a light switch moment of I'm doing this, or was it gradual?
It was gradual. I knew that even when I was a young person, I knew that eventually I was going to write. It was one of my unarticulated goals that I wanted to write a history book.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that history book was going to be, but it was really the only thing that I didn't golf. I didn't watch football. I did watch football at the time. I was a Colts fan and I liked watching Peyton Manning. In subsequent years, I've been less interested in football because I think there's too many meetings. Peyton Manning had a very good way of, limiting meetings on the field.
Yeah.
But I was, I knew that at some point I was going to write a book. It wasn't until I got, I went to the extortion funeral in 2011 that things started to coalesce. I went, and I really started to think about, this institution, my experience, my history, my own family history. And I just started to, want to understand, where I came from. I think that's where all of us, that's where we come to history, and that's where we come to history most honestly.
Yeah.
We want to know where we came from.
Yeah.
I used to be critical of historians that only, wrote about, their, things that they had a personal connection to. The Irish historian who only writes about Irish history, or the black historian who only writes about slavery or anything like that. But then I started to think about my own experience in the SEAL teams, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is how you do it. You before you expand your circle to understand the world around you, you have to first understand where you came from, and that starts at the dinner table. You start by asking questions of your parents. What did you do? How did you grow up? Where did you go? Where did you serve? Things like that. It wasn't. So when I got through the teams and my first kid came along, and I realized I'm not going to be able to deploy away from this guy. That I wanted to understand this experience.
Do you think that there's an element of bias that is created out of that kind of singular focus on the connection of what the author has in terms of kind of over romanticizing?
Yeah, you have to watch out for it. You've got there are a lot of folks out there who have written highly self-congratulatory books about the SEAL teams and it's not just about the SEAL teams, but about whatever institution they come from. There are things that are remarkable about the SEAL teams, and they should be talked about. But to oversell it, I think, is doing the teams a disservice. You've got to you have to recognize that you have a bias. And one of the reasons I wanted to cut the book off in Vietnam is I didn't want to get too close to any period of time that I served in. I didn't think I could maintain objectivity.
Yeah.
And that's the key. You have a bias. You have to be able to recognize that bias, but that doesn't mean that you are that you can dispense with objectivity. Objectivity is what keeps you honest. You have to have that natural, healthy skepticism of yourself, but also of others that you're going to be writing about. It's hard to do that when you're writing about people that you naturally want to venerate. I'm writing about people like Bill Darby. Like, who the hell am I write critically about Bill Darby, but you have to. You have to, you have to have the confidence to, place him in context. And it goes with all the SEALs that I wrote about too. There were guys that they gave a lot more to the SEAL teams than I ever gave, and you still have to place them in context.
The Phil Bucklew, the Draper Kaufman.
Yeah, and even guys that were even more recent, like somebody like Jim Barnes. Jim Barnes was, I write, I take a pretty hard shot at Jim Barnes. He was the first SEAL Team 1 commander to lead a direct action detachment into Vietnam, and he was a failure. He almost got the SEAL teams not only kicked out of Vietnam, but if they had been kicked out when they were kicked out, I think the Navy would have been, right to ask, well, why do we have these SEALs at all? And that, knowing what I knew about, the cycle, the life cycle of most special operations units prior to that, there's a good chance that the SEALs would have been disbanded altogether.
Yeah.
Because of that failure. Now, Jim Barnes is as I understand it, he's a good SEAL, good husband. You want to write complimentarily about a lot of these guys, but you also have to be honest about their role. That's tough to do.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I just wanted to take one step back. I do have a Patreon question from Val asking about some of your most difficult operations in Iraq. What kept you moving forward? What was your go-to coping strategy for managing the intense physical and mental toll this level of work has on you?
I don't know. I think if you're thinking about that, then you're already behind the power curve. I think if you're focusing on the job itself, and I think then the toll isn't something you think about.
Yeah.
Like if you're I don't think there was a moment on deployment where I was always just thinking about, making sure that I had, all of my artillery fires were set, all of my radio channels with any possible, supporting aircraft were ready. There's no time to think about anything else. You're going into every mission, as on limited sleep, looking down the barrel of at least 24 hours of no more sleep. So I don't recall, being too concerned about the physical toll or anything like that. It was always, making sure that you are professional and you've got everything squared away and you're not going to let anybody down.
Yeah. Amen on that for sure. Do you have an ability to do a almost, and I don't mean to make light of the amount of effort you've put into writing the book, but for the sake of some sort of brevity and that we can't have a 30-hour podcast, is there an ability to give kind of a Reader's Digest version of how the SEAL teams were born? We've already kind of gone over some of that, but just the scope of the book, the time frame window that the book focuses on, where you can kind of give a synopsis of it. Yeah,
sure. There's two. I was trying to place these things next to each other. There's a myth of how the SEALs were created. There's this myth that the underwater demolition teams are created in World War II. Planners don't really know what to do with them, so they keep them around. They perform credible service in Korea, but already in Korea, the underwater demolition teams are like kind of they're pulling at their reins to do more, to go further, and they are, and that's what takes them into Vietnam. The SEALs, the Navy's not thrilled about having this inland capability, but the SEALs, manage to convince planners in their chain of command that they need to be created. The SEALs are created. They go to Vietnam and they pull against the reins of their conventional Navy leaders, and they create the institution that we know, the SEAL teams. That's the myth. That's the origin myth, and every institution has this origin myth. The up from your bootstraps. We did it all on our own type story. It's not true. It's all bullshit. It's not all bullshit. it's as much true as our own origin story as a nation. This idea that we managed to defeat the largest, greatest army on the planet by with a colonial militia that was hiding behind trees and fighting like Indians when these conventionals were just marching on line. Also not true. We defeated the British because we were able to stay in the field longer and wait until the British public opinion turned against the war. SEALs were created because often in spite of leaders in the underwater demolition teams that didn't want to go further inland. It was the Navy that created the SEAL teams because the SEALs provided an opportunity for the Navy to push their influence and their relevance further afield than they ever had. If you got rid of the SEAL teams today, the Navy in 5 years would recreate them. Navy needs the SEAL teams to project power ashore. The reason that the SEAL teams exist, I guess the thesis of the book is that there's sort of two things that are happening. There's the Army, Marine Corps side where repeated failures create gaps in the U.S. military's order of battle. Thoughtful naval planners saw those gaps, and then they pushed the institution further and further in there. It wasn't until we got to Vietnam, though, because the SEALs weren't really the SEALs until we get to Vietnam, when they create this new sort of operational cycle, this capture-kill operational cycle, that the SEAL teams cease to be, this coastal raiding force and become this go anywhere type of commando force that we know today. And it's because of this training that we have. I mean, latitude is a powerful thing, but latitude, operational latitude, it doesn't matter if you don't lean into it.
I guess from a transitional period and the relevance of the SEAL community being born in that early stages of Vietnam, would you credit JFK with playing the biggest role in making that happen, or is that kind of also part of the myth?
That's part of the myth. No, JFK does play a role, and he pushes the U.S. military to take this type of warfare seriously. But the idea for the SEAL teams had been in the Navy's had been in the conversation for naval planners for over a year before he's even elected. The Navy was already on a glide path to create the SEAL teams before he gets there. If anything, JFK's influence had the potential to derail naval special warfare and push them into not the organization that we know, but into a more maritime version of the Army Special Forces. It's probably only because of Vietnam and because of a couple of other influential folks that we get the SEAL teams that we have today.
Who are those influential folks?
Well, one is Bucklew. Bucklew, who, he's not a SEAL. He was a scout and raider, and then technically he's not an amphibious Roger when he goes to China, but he acts in a sort of amphibious Roger type role. But he's the longest serving member of Naval Special Warfare, lowercase Naval Special Warfare, because Naval Special Warfare is not technically created until the 80s. But if Naval Special Warfare is lowercase, and we're calling all of those units, the NCDUs, the UDTs, Scouts and Raiders, and the amphibious Rogers, we're calling them Naval Special Warfare. He's the longest serving member in the Navy's unconventional programs. He is placed in charge of all UDT and SEAL forces. And a lot of the reason that the Navy pushes into direct action commando type raiding is because of the report he writes in 1964, colloquially called the Bucklew Report. And it's a report, that he brings, half a dozen other leading thinkers to Vietnam. They take a couple months. They put this report together, and ultimately it convinces the Navy to take a much more proactive, aggressive inland role in the war. And then he is in charge of the SEALs when the SEALs are almost kicked out. He's influential. I would say there's a story. I mean, we talked about Dick Marcinko before. Dick Marcinko makes the case in his book that it's his platoon, the 8th platoon, that deploys in the fall of 1967. That it's his platoon that makes the transition, that kind of pushes the SEALs from this patrol and ambush type operational cycle into the capture-kill, intel-driven mission. Kind of what his whole book is about. It's his premise. He makes his bones about it. So I knew that. I'd read the book. I'd remembered that, so I reread the book before I started working on this chapter, and then I went and I found all of his after-action reports for the 8th Platoon, and I went through and I started to plot, insert extract points, action on objective points. I had to reteach myself how to, do all the Latin long and everything like that. And then I talked to guys that were in his platoon, and I found that all those claims that he made about being the platoon that, made the SEAL teams what they are, it's bullshit.
Really?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was Dick Marcinko is very good at, he's an excellent frogman, and he was excellent at convincing planners, to do things that they didn't naturally, want to do. But he was a born, self-promoter. And when he wrote that book, or when he had a ghostwriter write that book for him, he was doing the best he can to sort of rehabilitate his reputation after he had been arrested and incarcerated. In fact, the platoon that makes that transition for the SEAL teams is the 7th Platoon, deployed at about the same time, also a SEAL Team 2 platoon. But they were the ones that really started to use intel sources and get away from that, set a patrol all night or set an ambush all night and wait for the enemy to come to you. They actually started to, they had a very proactive interpreter who had very good relationships with the local police department and other intel sources, and they started to not just, set, random ambushes for Viet Cong. They started to go after individual Viet Cong with names. And that's where we get the intel or the capture-kill cycle that we have, or that we, ultimately,
become,
makes the SEALs what they become.
Yeah. Was there I guess first in that 7th Platoon, are there any names from that platoon that are well known?
Bob Gallagher is probably the most well known. Bob Gallagher, the Eagle, is what they call him. Very quiet. The platoon commander is Pete Peterson. Well, Pete Peterson, if you talk to him today, he would say he would make the case that it was Bob Gallagher's doing. I disagree. I think it was these two guys working together that actually pushed the 7th Platoon to become what it becomes. And Pete is he's the anti-Gallagher, or he's the anti-Marcinko. He's the guy who's never self-promoting. We both know, these guys in the SEAL teams. There are lots of guys that are self-promoting, guys. They can be a great frogman. But we also know these self-effacing guys that, they don't talk about what they do very much. They can also be a great frogman. Pete Peterson is a great example of that. He was not, he does this platoon in Vietnam, and then he essentially goes back to the UDTs. It's his lone direct action SEAL deployment, and it's one of the most consequential in history.
Can you share any of it? I mean, what was?
Sure.
Or is it just what you kind of described earlier?
Yeah, I mean, they get into country and they have an honest look around at how effective the patrol and ambush had been, and they realize that it's not working, the way that we want it to work. So they just start, beating the bushes and trying to come up with a different, not necessarily a different way to do things, but a different way to get intelligence. And in the process of, finding, different sources of intelligence, they sort of stumble on this cycle of business because, every time they find one of the guys that they've been looking for, they don't kill them. They interrogate them. They ransack them for information. And one guy, gives them the addresses of 5 more guys, and then they go and they get those 5 more guys, and those guys give, 20 more addresses of guys, and then they're enlisting, Hoi Chans to take them to various places, and it just becomes a sort of a self-sustaining cycle. it becomes more of like a law enforcement operational cycle than it becomes anything that the military's ever done.
Would you say 67 from a year or window wise was the height of the SEAL team efficacy in Vietnam, or was
67 is still on sort of the far left cusp of that. It's not until after Tet that the SEAL teams become the SEAL teams, and then that cycle that SEAL Team 2 develops, it metastasizes, and there's a sort of a parallel effort going on with Bob Wagner. Bob Wagner was the one who was coming up with the PRU program. He had
which is what?
Provincial Reconnaissance Units. It's the teeth. It's the teeth portion of the Phoenix program. It's the program where we it's a sort of CIA sponsored program where you take former VC or Viet Cong guerrillas and you enlisted them to help find their old comrades. They give them American training, and advisors would lead them on various, the 3R missions, the recon, wrecking, and raiding. Mostly raiding, and mostly to go find more Viet Cong to do the same thing. Now the PRUs are very effective. They're hunting mostly in their own backyards, but there's a limit to what those PRU teams can do, and so oftentimes they're outsourcing their intel to whatever team is available. Sometimes it's a LERP team, but in the Mekong Delta, by and large, it's the SEAL teams. So the SEAL teams who are developing their own intel-driven capture-kill cycle, and the PRUs, which are developing an incredible amount of intelligence, they're joining forces to become a very potent killing force.
With the PRU program, are you aware of any green on blue issues that were experienced in Afghanistan in that same way, or were they pretty loyal?
Say the question again.
The PRU program, where they're taking VC and rehabilitating, re-educating, whatever, and flipping them.
Yeah.
Were there ever any green on blue? Where they're attacking, like they're doing it to just get inside and attack our guys, like what happened in Afghanistan a number of times?
No, none that I came across. I'm sure there were, instances where that happened. Now, when I was doing the research into the PRU, you have to keep some of that at an arm's length, otherwise it's going to swamp the whole project.
Really?
And you have to remind yourself, you're not writing a history of the PRU, you're writing a history of the SEAL teams. So how are the PRUs relevant to the SEAL teams is always the question. Otherwise, your research can take you off into
no man's land.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that, a number of times. I don't know how many pages got left on the cutting room floor because of, me not wanting to abandon a 3-week effort I had made into a research area. So,
I imagine, if the level of fascination increases with whatever road you're going down, you inherently want to keep going down it.
Yeah, when you're developing this knowledge and this expertise, all you want to do is increase that knowledge and expertise, because now you're in their world.
Yeah.
And these names are becoming familiar to you, and you want to find out what happens to all these people. And
so it sounds like it was really the last, say, 3 or 4 years of the Vietnam War that where SEALs really were shining the most.
Yeah, and it's not just because of the SEALs that did that, those consequential SEALs that I talk about, the Pete Petersons and the Bob Gallaghers and the Bob Wagners. It's also because the entire organization recognizes what those guys are doing in the field, and then they go all in on it. They support these innovations organizationally by creating training venues back in the United States to bootstrap that experience and to franchise it. It doesn't help if only Bob Wagner knows how to lead a PRU. It helps if Bob Wagner, if you make 10 more Bob Wagners or 60 more Bob Wagners. And it helps if it doesn't help if the 7th platoon is the only one that knows how to do this capture kill. It only helps if you pass down that knowledge. So,
was there, I guess, from a big picture of the overall Vietnam War as it relates to the entire Department of Defense, did the path of that war dictate or help the SEAL teams kind of funnel their expertise into that level, or was it more?
Absolutely. In part because, the the way that war was run was organizationally was so mishandled. It creates huge opportunities for the Navy. So the policy of individual rotation almost destroys all of the other special operations units that are in Vietnam. So you've got Green Berets, you've got LRPs, you've got Marine Recon. They all so when Green Berets initially deployed to Vietnam in between 62 and 64, they're deploying as A-teams. 64 is when they really start to deploy as A-teams. So you've got a whole 12-man package that has gone through the Q course together. They've trained together for 6 months at least. They deploy together as a group. They deployed for 6 months, and then they return to the United States together. It's the problem with that is the Army's paying too much in per diem because these guys are going over together. They're deploying to Vietnam as together, so the Army's paying money hand over fist to pay per diem for these guys. So they start to break up these platoons, and they start to leave guys in country. They create the 5th Special Forces Group, which becomes a permanent station, so you can just automatically assign guys to the 5th Special Forces Group, so you don't have to pay them per diem anymore because that's an actual posting. But then guys just start rotating in and out, so you don't have a 6-month pre-deployment training anymore where guys learn to operate together. You have guys that are graduating the Q course, and you're sending them directly to the 5th Special Forces Group where they jump into an A-team that they don't know, that they've never trained with, and now they're operating, and it takes them at least 3 months, to get up to speed. And then you've got a whole batch of new guys that are coming in, where experience is going out, inexperience is coming in. SEAL teams never do that. SEAL teams, they have the graduate buds. You do your, whether it's Ranger School or Jungle Warfare School or any of the other specialty schools, then you're at least training for 6 months together, then you're deploying together, and then you're returning home together. So the SEAL teams, succeed in part because everyone else is just performing so badly. And not to say that, there aren't, Army and Marines out there that are doing incredibly brave and heroic stuff. There absolutely are. But their institutions didn't do them any favors when they sent them over there.
How long was the average or normal SEAL deployment in Vietnam?
6 months.
6 months. So, I mean, in as unbiased of a way as possible, is it safe to say then that the SEAL teams were, just because of the organization standpoint, were kind of the varsity special operations crew in Vietnam? I
was always self-conscious about saying that before I got into the research of this. Not anymore. Absolutely, they were.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say. I didn't want to undercut, the experiences of these other units. But absolutely, they were. They undercut them.
Yeah. I guess so. As Vietnam wrapped up, how did your research and book kind of conclude as that being kind of the end of the window that you wanted to cover in the book?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to write the book. I wanted to get to the point where the SEAL teams became what we recognize as SEAL teams are, and I knew that had happened in Vietnam. So it took me. So even when I wrote the proposal, my proposal that I sent to Random House and that was ultimately approved, it wasn't open-ended. I didn't say I'm going to write a history of the SEAL teams. I never said I was going to write a comprehensive history. I said I was going to write a history that answers this question: how did the SEAL teams, or how did the Navy, the least likely branch of service, come to create the country's first go-anywhere commando force? So once I had, I knew that it happened in Vietnam. And that was my end point. Once I got to Vietnam, I knew that the SEAL teams resembled the SEAL teams today that we had both served in, and that's when I could stop.
Yeah. The title, By Water Beneath the Walls, where does that come from?
That was so the title. So the working title for the book was The Evolution. And I don't know. I had always thought. You ever see that picture in McPee's with the You got the UDT guy who's crawling on the beach. Then you got a Vietnam SEAL who's sort of kneeling, in camouflage with a stoner, and then next to that you've got a SEAL in full armor and in kit in Iraq or something like that. Have you seen that? Yeah. And it that the way that it's oriented is meant to look like an evolution, of a primate to a human being. And so I was interested in that transformation. I wanted to understand. Not only that, but I liked this idea that every event that you perform in Buds is called an evolution. I don't know any other institution that calls events evolution. It's something about this organization that has undergone the most wild transformation in the history of the U.S. military. I thought that was a clever title. The problem with that is it's evolution is a sort of arbitrary, mindless process. And the more that I thought about the book, the more I was like, there's nothing mindless about what happened here. The reason that the SEAL teams became the SEAL teams and ultimately became this thing was because of individuals who made very specific decisions. And there's nothing arbitrary or mindless about that. So I was like, well, what is this? And it took me lots of thinking, lots of walks, lots of runs to try and sort of sort this question out. And ultimately, I had to bring this book back to, the studs and think what's the book? Ultimately, I decided the book was an underdog story. And so I started to think, well, what are some of the most remarkable underdog stories that are out there? And I, growing up the way that I did with, a dad and a grandfather who, kind of raised me on these crusader stories about guys sneaking into castles, using an aqueduct or something like that, or these biblical stories that my dad would give me. I thought, that's a cool story. One, because it sort of uses the metaphor of, the Army and the Marine Corps as like the walls of this, guarding their institutional prerogatives. And I liked the idea of, guys using the water, to sort of sneak under those prerogatives. So once I had that idea, it was really just a matter of, going back through my database or my mental database to who were the, what are the great stories from history where, crusaders did that. And I settled on, the experience of Justinian II, him crossing the Black Sea and sneaking under the walls of Constantinople. And, before I knew it, I wrote this vignette, which is the original, the vignette at the beginning of the book. The title just came from that, that little writing assignment that I gave myself. And it was probably the fastest writing that I ever did. So once I had that, it took me 2 to 3 weeks to come up with the title. The manuscript was already in, and the editor was like, well, what are we calling this book? And it wasn't until once I sat down and actually wrote that, I was like, this is the title.
I mean, I love the backstory on it. I am curious, in passing, how the fuck do you tell that when somebody's like, oh, how did you name it? How do you quickly synopsize that? Or I don't
have a good quick answer for anything. I don't have an elevator story or an elevator pitch. I just say, it's a
Constantinople reference.
Yeah, I mean, I say, when people ask me about the title, I say, turn the first page, and you'll know. It's right there on the first page. And
Yeah. Is there any other part of history in particular that you're the most fascinated by outside of the window of the book?
Oh gosh, yeah. This is the window of the book is probably the period that I'm least interested in.
Is there a top most interested part of history that
so my reading list is always pretty all over the place. When I got out of the teams the first time, I dated the idea of going to get a PhD, and when I sat down to write the application to get go through the doctoral process, you kind of have to think about what your thesis is going to be. I thought I would be interested in the Napoleonic Wars. That professor that I had at Purdue, he was he was a Napoleonic War expert, so I thought that'd be cool. I got the more that I read and researched, I got a pretty good interest in the First World War. But I try to read as broadly as possible whenever I'm writing too. In particular, I don't want all of my reading and my mental space to be devoted to only the thing that I'm working on. I'd like to stretch my legs as much as possible. So. Yeah.
With this amount of research and doing some super deep digging into archives, is there a way to, or how do you corroborate and ensure accuracy, or are you just kind of doing your best to corroborate it through multiple sources?
Yeah, you have to have a good sense of the material. So before you interview anybody, and I think this is where most journalists will fail when they write history books, is they will interview a lot of people, and they don't have the background in digging up that corroborative detail to make sure what they're being told is true. They rest on the idea that, well, this person told me that, so even if it's not true, I'm saying that they told me, so I'm limiting my responsibility to the truth. I think that's a cop-out. I think you have to have a solid grounding in the material before you even think about going out and talking to people. So you can, one, have the knowledge to, ask follow-up questions, but also, have a sense of, is this person, being completely forthright? Are they embellishing their record or embellishing what they know?
It gives you a good bullshit meter.
It does, and that's, and there is stuff in the book that I don't have any corroborative detail. I don't have a report saying this is true, but you have to the more you do this, the more you get a sense of what is true.
Yeah. Was there a
and I think that's an important thing for people to realize now. Like when you're listening to a speaker on the news say, I've done a lot of research into this. Well, research isn't a Google search, or a number of Google searches, or research is saturating yourself with the material. And unless you're saturating yourself, then you probably should keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, you're regurgitating.
Yeah.
Was there a part of the SEAL history and story that surprised you the most? Yeah, I think those moments. I was surprised that the myth wasn't true. Of its origins.
Yeah, I think we all think that that the Navy is resents the SEAL teams because in part we've all experienced resentment from the fleet. We've encountered. On that deployment with SEAL Team 4, there's a story that I tell where I was the lowest ranking guy in that platoon, and so the nomenclature on my shoulder patch was Bravo 4-4. I was in the 4th squad, and I was the 4th ranking guy in that squad. But there was a female lieutenant commander who was walking through one of the passageways while we were getting our gear together once. I think we were on the Nashville. And she stopped me and she goes, "I'm sorry, I have to ask, what does the B44 stand for?" And I just looked at it, I was like, "Well, that's the number of kills we have." And then I went back to prepping my gear. But, she stopped. And when I said that, she sort of gave she took a pause and she gave me a knowing look like, "I'm sorry, you had to talk about it." And then she, went about her day, and a couple days later, we're still on the ship. I'm walking down a passageway, and before I know it, guys are the seas are parting anytime I walked anywhere, because I guess it had gotten around that I was the guy on the ship that had, killed the most people. Yeah. And she was in a boardroom meeting with the commanding officer of SEAL Team 1, the Master Chief of SEAL Team 1, and they were talking about this guy, B44, Bravo 44. And she said, well, he's the guy in the platoon that has the most kills. And the Master Chief was like, "That kid hasn't even been in combat yet." And she was humiliated, and she tried to bring me up on charges for lying to an officer.
Holy shit! Wow.
Yes, it became a whole thing.
Yeah.
So lots of SEALs have experienced that, sort of, that, uncomfortable relationship the fleet has with the SEAL teams. And so we have, taken that, and when we've heard the stories about, the SEAL origins, it resonates. It makes sense because we have that, we have that experience. But it's just not true.
Yeah.
I mean, the fleet needs the SEAL teams just as much as the SEALs need the fleet.
Well, I suppose now, and I know you try to steer clear of kind of the whole SOCOM relationship, but I mean, at this point, the SEAL teams kind of aren't even in the Navy. I mean, they are.
You're right. I mean, with the creation, the most remarkable thing in the history of the world of special operations, or all of special operations, is this institutionalization or this corporatization of special operations, and that's the creation of SOCOM.
Yeah.
This idea that special operations are more with less, or they're not special operations. Yeah. You're either promising, big strategic impacts with low investment, or what is it?
Yeah.
It's the SAS model, or it's not. And so the creation of SOCOM is this, the natural American, impulse to make something corporate, or make something, to stamp it as official, to create a fifth branch of service. Essentially, it acts as a fifth branch of service, and now it doesn't even belong to the Navy.
Yeah. Maybe a sixth branch, since there's Space Force now.
Right. Oh my gosh. Right. Sixth. Yeah.
To me, it would make sense to have, as much as I love the tradition, and I know, the Army does and the Marines do, but at this point, I think it kind of makes sense for SOCOM to be its own smaller branch, have its own boot camp, like that the whole pipeline is set up for special operators, and then you go specialize in either maritime or, whatever. I don't know. To me,
I don't know either.
Like, it's kind of heartbreaking to even think of that, because you're basically disbanding everybody. But
yeah.
But if you look at it, if you remove your kind of emotional connection to heritage and lineage and being proud of that and the story behind it, I think if it's purely a pragmatic matter, like, it just makes more sense to do that. I don't know. Like, to me, especially in the Navy, like for SEAL candidates to go through Navy boot camp, like, I know that they have their own divisions now and it's a little different, but it's still largely a fucking waste of time.
Well, yeah, it is.
I don't know.
I'm a much more conservative and cautious person when it comes to making huge institutional changes like that.
Yeah.
Just because I think things tend to evolve institutionally for a reason. And I'm always like, well, what's the reason? And why is it this way? And if it's not broke, why are we fixing it?
Yeah.
At the same time, I think all people from special operations have a well-founded, skepticism of tradition, and that's served us well. How can you think outside the box if you aren't skeptical? You have to be able to flip something on its ear. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'd like to hear the other case for keeping it as
counter
is.
argument. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, there's a strange dichotomy with if it ain't broke, don't fix it. While I don't completely disagree, or I would even say I largely agree, there's also something to be said for always trying to improve and streamline and become more efficient and more effective. And if you're always saying like, shit works, fucking leave it alone, it's going to be hard to get better.
One of the last in the last few pages of the Mike Vickers book, he made a case for combining MARSOC and NSW into a single maritime component within SOCOM.
Yeah. In
order to, his whole purpose for that was to raise the star that you could get, to increase. Because right now SOCOM is a 2-star, or excuse me, not so. WARCOM is a 2-star. MARSOC is a 2-star. The Raiders have a 2-star. Army has a 3-star. So if you combined these two into a single institution, you'd be able to have a 3rd star. I don't know. I'm not sure. I guess I would like to hear the counter.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, again, the quick glance is like, yeah, that seems reasonable, seems to make sense.
It does, but now what you've created this. What's the delineation of responsibilities? Now, once you create something, you're going to naturally want one of the components to specialize in something because you don't want redundant forces.
Yeah.
So what's the
you just have a battle royale and the half that's left.
I mean, you'd be like, okay, so MARSOC, you take the unconventional warfare, and the SEAL, and NSW takes the special reconnaissance and direct action rating. I can't imagine that they would want. Yeah, it's not going right.
Yeah, you'd have guys jumping ship.
Right.
Was there a favorite part of the book research wise for you?
There's the research, like I said, it's so seductive. You're turning pages and you're uncovering stuff that you don't think any other person has found. There was a moment where in my seventh chapter, chapter 8, my chapter of the Army Rangers in Korea. I was set on covering this one mission that was a Ranger-led mission of Korean guerrillas into Central Korea. It was Navy sponsored. Navy had proposed this mission, and Army had responded, and they selected four Rangers to lead 20 Korean guerrillas to blow up a bridge or blow up a tunnel. Parachute mission into it. The problem with this mission, it hit all of the wickets that I needed to hit in order to push my narrative forward. The problem was I couldn't find any corroborative detail for it. I couldn't find any actual report. It seemed to me that there was a CIA component to it, which is probably why I couldn't find any of the original operations plans or anything like that. So I was kind of stuck. I had books that had been written about it, but even those books didn't their endnotes didn't point me to any document that was kept in any archive that I could track down. Now, I knew that the operation ended in disaster. I knew the leading ranger had been taken. He'd become a POW. So he, I knew that there was probably a record at the National Archive of his POW service. I had come across these in the past with various research efforts where I had found the post-release POW reports, usually like a 2-page document. It talks about where the person was captured, what their imprisonment was like, but they didn't spend a lot of time with these guys because they're just trying to get them back to their families. So this guy, Martin Watson, I submitted a request to see if I could track down his POW report. National Archives said, yes, we do have a POW report for him, but nobody has looked at it ever. So you'll have to put in the FOIA request for it. And so I did. I was like, okay. So I put in the FOIA request, which is a cumbersome, timely process, but it comes back. It's approved. It took a couple months, but once it got approved, they said it's been approved. And I live in Chicago. The National Archives is in Maryland. I was like, can you take the report out and just scan it and email it to me? Like, no, it's in another report that's about 750 pages, and we can't separate it. So I was like, all right. So I figured I'll just get it the next time I'm there. A couple months go by. I go back in town for a research. I've abandoned the idea of covering this mission, because I just don't have the detail for it. And I almost forget that I had actually put in a FOIA request for this report. So it's toward the end of the day. It's about 3 o'clock. I'm exhausted. My back hurts. I haven't eaten all day. And I remember, oh, shoot, I put in the FOIA request for this thing. I should at least see what it is. So they bring out the report, and it's not 2 pages. It's 750 pages. It's everything that I wanted. It's got all the corroborative detail of this thing, and it's got this guy's arrest record before the war. It's got everything. It's got his whole. It's interviews with all the prisoners that he'd served with. it made the report, or it made the chapter. But not only that, the best part is I had gotten to know his family in the process of researching this thing, and a lot of them didn't have a close relationship with their dad, and being able to present that back to them, the 750 pages which had been written about their dad was pretty. Oh
wow,
it's one of my favorite things.
That's amazing, man! What a neat story. In that 750 pages, I mean, are they going into detail about some of the torture tactics used and that kind of stuff?
Yes.
What anything stand out?
Isolation, mock executions. They'd held a kangaroo court the day that the armistice was signed, in which they told him explicitly, the war is over. Everyone here is going to get released except you, because he hadn't talked to them about anything, and so they marched him out to execute him, and he still wouldn't talk. He was the second to last guy to be released across the Freedom Bridge, and the only reason he wasn't the last guy was because the last guy was on the fence about whether or not he wanted to be repatriated.
Wow. I mean, you could do a whole book on that guy.
You could. I don't know that I would want to go back over all that ground again. I think somebody should. Somebody should, though. It's a hell of a story, and he was awarded a Silver Star for that. Not sure why. I mean, I think he's a perfect candidate for reassessing for a Medal of Honor.
Yeah. I'm assuming he's not still with us.
No, he passed away. Yeah. He passed away. He had from, I think, lung cancer.
Was there a most difficult thing that you uncovered during research? Like the hardest to realize?
There were atrocities that came across when you spend enough time, trying to track down individual events that happen, and you come across an atrocity, and then you start to put things together, and like, if I keep going on this, I'm gonna be able to put together who did this, and I'm not sure that I want to do that.
Really? Did you ever go that far with anything? No.
Intentionally not.
Yeah. Do you have any desire to do that now? Like, why do you not want to know?
Some of the people are dead. So it would be academic at this point. I don't think there's not going to be an indictment or anything like that. But there is no statute of limitations on murder.
Do you think, looking back at that window of time, because you've done so much research on it, and I know this is probably too much of an oversimplification question-wise, do you look at the United States as the good guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, atrocities happen in every war, no matter how righteous the cause. I think we're more righteous. And I still think that we are the last best chance on earth, for the protecting individual liberties and, I don't know. What was the question?
Do you still think we're the good guys?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And that's not to say that I think that we're not. It's just you've done so much research, way more than anybody else that I even know of, not just...
No, that's not true. There's
that I know.
There's lots of folks out there that are doing incredibly credible research. I think if you do this much research, though, and you develop a good callus, and you become pretty realistic about human beings.
Yeah. Was there ever a part of you that, as you were operating in Iraq, and I know it would be kind of thinking back on it at this point, but could kind of parallel things that were from a tactics and warfighting standpoint developed and innovated in Vietnam that were now taking place in Iraq, the way you guys were doing it?
I was shocked at how close the operational cycles were.
Really?
It almost seemed like there was no difference. The only difference had been, in the implementation of technology and in the not the corporatization, but the we had trained intelligence professionals, SEALs, that have been trained in in dealing with sources and payments and things like that. At the time, that was the SEALs and all special operations were in their infancy in that. They were, Pete Peterson was, using his own money to pay sources, his own paycheck money to pay sources. We've done a lot better, not only, making that easier and more standardized, but those lessons have, not just stayed within NSW. They've been passed, along to all the other, components. None of that's remarkable anymore.
Yeah. So basically, 7th platoon to today, it's been relatively unchanged.
The major
science technology.
Yeah, the major changes have come in the in technology, but also in the organizational changes.
Yeah. You mentioned that Hell Week was kind of born and bred out of D-Day. Can you expound on that?
So the reason that Hell Week exists is directly tied to this impossible mission that planners knew that some unit was going to have to undertake ahead of the Allied landing in Normandy. As early as 1940, obstacles are starting to appear on French and Belgian beaches. That effort hits overdrive in 1944, early 1944. But in 1943, there's enough obstacles that planners realize that they've got to put a unit in charge of the underwater demolition of the obstacles on the beaches in Normandy. The problem is bombers aren't sophisticated enough to blow gaps in these sea lanes to destroy the obstacles. And naval gunfire isn't accurate enough to do it either. Not only that, but when the Germans start putting mines on top of these obstacles, they fear that bombs are just going to make the problem worse because they're going to hit these obstacles and they're going to spray mines everywhere, complicating the landing even further. So they know that these obstacles with mines attached to them are going to have to be destroyed by hand. So the German defenses are getting more sophisticated with every landing. Their defense in depth is improving. So they know that how do you handle this problem. So Navy has a sort of institutional power grab with the Army to try and take the mission. The Navy's leaning hard into taking as much responsibility away from the Army as possible, so they put this mission in the hands of a very young Draper Kaufman. Draper Kaufman is, if you know from the book, he was a Navy reject. He had gone through the academy because of poor eyesight. He was he's allowed to graduate, but he's kicked out of the Navy, so he's not allowed to serve. Fighting for his own relevance, he ends up joining the French Army as an ambulance driver. He's captured. He becomes a POW. He's released. Instead of returning home to the United States, he joins the British Navy, becomes a bomb disposal officer, fights through the Blitz. By the time of the U.S. entry into World War II, he's probably the American who's seen the most of the war so far. So he has a much more sophisticated understanding of what combat is than probably any other American alive. And when he's handed this mission of destroying the obstacles, he knows he's got to create a unit that's capable of doing it. So he goes down to Fort Pierce. He starts to research, the other commando organizations that are operating down there. He finds the Scouts and Raiders. He kind of enlists a cadre around himself. He likes the Scouts and Raiders curriculum. The Scouts and Raiders curriculum has been developed in part by former NFL jocks. It's very team oriented. Lots of log PT, lots of small boat races, things like that. The only problem with that is it's not compressed enough. It takes too long to create the type of unit. He doesn't have a lot of time before D-Day, so he has to. So he's trying to figure out what to do, and he's talking to his cadre, and how hard should this training be? Should it be twice as hard? Should it be 3 times as hard? One of the other Navy chiefs who's there, who's experienced combat himself, says, knowing what the mission is, this should be 10 times as hard. So Draper Kaufman, he takes the Scouts and Raiders curriculum, compresses it from 8 weeks into 5.5 days, and that's how we get Hell Week. And then, almost immediately, planners are skeptical of this. They're like, the first couple classes that he puts through, the attrition rate is very, very high. Planners are like, how can you justify this? Nobody else is losing this number of volunteers. Because Draper believes that this mission is so important, and he has to create, units that are capable of adapting and thinking on the fly, and enduring such, harsh conditions in a maritime environment, he justifies the course by putting himself through it. Completes the course himself. Planners give him a stay of execution. The guys that complete Draper's course go on to land on D-Day. In many cases, they land ahead of their Army comrades, while the Army soldiers in those first waves are able to take shelter under the lip of the bluffs in the shingle out of direct fire of the enemy's guns. The NCDUs have to stay out in the in the beaten zone where machine gun fire, artillery fire has almost unimpeded access to them. And they suffer 52% casualties. So of the 190 NCDUs that land on Omaha Beach, 32 are killed, another 65 are wounded. So it's one of the highest casualty rates in all of D-Day. Because of that, planners are loath to get rid of the course, and they essentially let Hell Week stand because it proves that these guys could accomplish an impossible mission. That's where we get it.
The fact that story is not told to every Bud student the eve of Hell Week starting, to me, is a fucking travesty.
I think it is now, but you're right. I mean, I didn't know the story myself. I think it's and it is it's an incredibly important story for us to understand. Like we were born with that impossible mission. That impossible mission is what brings this institution together. Yeah. And
man, that's incredible. Like I had no idea about any of that, which is kind of embarrassing. But
no, I mean, but it's the process of figuring out where you come from, and everybody. I might have been the first one to put it all down, but now that scores of people are reading this book, and they're, it's incredibly meaningful. I think. There should be staff rides. We should take whole platoons over to Normandy, to walk those beaches, and see the monument, and then connect their own service to this day, this most important day. It's the most important day in the history of the 20th century. Yeah. It's the day that determines whether or not we're going to win the war.
Yeah, I guess hearing you say that and then realizing like, man, I had no idea any of that was the case. It reminds me of like the high school kid that has no idea how America came to be, and it's like, fuck, you should know that.
Yeah, but it's not a young person's fault for not being interested. It's I mean, we're all about the same, and it takes a long time before I think anybody has the maturity and the perspective to start looking over their shoulder. Yeah. And realize, I'm not the first person to live on this planet and to experience these things. I've just accepted the world for what it is, but not really recognized the sacrifices that it took to get here. And they're not wrong to think that way. It's up to the folks that have that perspective
to beat it into them.
To find those moments of meaning and develop. It takes a lot. It's I've one of the great things about writing this book has been that I've been able to reconnect with the institution as a whole and go out and have present and talk and things like that. And it's amazing how many guys you talk to that are in senior positions in that training apparatus who don't know that history, but once they do know it, it becomes so much more meaningful to have that context, to have that texture. That's it's motivating and it's instructive. Now you know why we're getting guys wet and sandy.
Yeah.
Like the reason we're putting guys, making guys get sugar cookied up in the surf is because some UDT guys in the Pacific were doing the exact same thing to conceal themselves from Japanese sentries. So yeah, it's miserable, but there's a point.
Yeah. It's not just to be miserable.
Right.
Have you gotten any pushback from the community at all? Anybody that, has given you shit about doing this, or who do you think you are kind of stuff, or has it been all positive?
Oh, it's been all positive. The community's been just bent over backwards with generosity. Yeah. It's been, it's changed my life. I mean, I had no idea. I thought this book would come out, a handful of people would read it, and then I'd just go back to work. And it's, I never anticipated that there would be a reaction at all, let alone the positive reaction that I've gotten. Incredibly meaningful. And, I just an enormous amount of gratitude, and I couldn't have written it without so many other people. Not just people that helped me write, physically write it, or help provide resources to research and things like that, but also people that gave encouragement throughout the process. I talked about my friend Mark, got his eyes shot out. He would call me every week just to check on the book.
That's awesome.
And a lot of these guys, they had no business doing that. I mean, how many books had come out, before I started working on this? Like, the saturation of SEAL books in the market was like, there were a lot of people that were irritated by it. I always say, don't be irritated by the number of SEAL books. You want to know why SEALs write books? Because people buy them. People are fascinated with this institution. They're right to be fascinated. There is something about, what this institution has given to the country, and it's right for people to want to know about it. So,
do you see a shift, like let's say since the mid 2000s of kind of, or I guess the late, first decade of the 2000s, where Lone Survivor kind of really kicked the hornet's nest over for SEAL books past the Vietnam era, the kind of the new era of SEAL books, where it's almost kind of gone so far to where like there's almost a resentment or fucking SEALs, like almost a negative connotation, because it seems that way to me.
Yeah, there's some resentment. SEALs have had a disproportionate share of recognition from the last 20 years, and I can see why there would be resentment about that. And one of the objectives I had in writing the book and writing it the way that I did was to show how all of these institutions are so connected. So it's not, when I wrote this, I wasn't thinking about just writing a history of the SEAL teams. I wanted to write a biography of the SEAL teams. And biographies, I think, are best written when that central character acts as sort of a hub around which all the satellites orbit. And the satellites of the SEAL teams are all of those other institutions that are just as important, and whose gravitational pull helped, chart the course of the SEALs development. The Rangers and, I don't know how, I've never really counted, but, how many folks did I, spend time talking about, that aren't SEALs, not SEALs, but not even in the Navy. So I think, there is going to be, in the next 20 years, there's going to be an over-the-shoulder glance at all of these institutions, and it will put the SEALs in the proper perspective. And hopefully, the SEALs will be, just one of the institutions that helped, shoulder this burden.
Yeah.
But it's not wrong. It's not wrong for publishers to publish SEAL books. Because there's a demand for them. There's I don't exactly know why there's such a demand for this one, agency, but if we have to act as the, the standard bearer, to draw attention to the rest of special operations, and so be it. Somebody's got to.
For the naysayer, especially within the community of the, hey, you're pimping the Trident. We're supposed to be silent professionals. None of this stuff should be talked about. What is your response to that?
I think guys are most irritated with when there's a lack of humility. If you want to talk about your service, and you bring humility to it, and recognize that you didn't win the war on your own. A lot of people helped you. Then I think a lot more people would be receptive to the disproportionate number of SEAL books. It's when we thump our chests that I think people are rightly irritated.
Yeah,
and we have a number of chest thumpers out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think there, just like with everything, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, to promote things, to talk about things, et cetera. But there is a portion of the community, I think, that at least verbalizes the despisement of any talk about it whatsoever. Like you shouldn't even tell people you were a SEAL, let alone.
Yeah, that's ludicrous.
Yeah, I agree. I just there is a portion of the community that seems to feel that way. Which to me, it's like,
I was on the Team House podcast not too terribly long ago, and one of the hosts, Jack Murphy, he's a pretty
outspoken.
Yeah, outspoken, defund NSW type. Super nice guy, face to face, and complimentary of SEAL legacy and everything like that, and well-read reader, and I think most people, when you actually sit down with them, some of the things they say on Twitter, they're less likely to say face to face.
Yeah, I mean,
and much more.
I think that's with everything.
Sure. But yeah, social media has done a number on our civility.
Yeah. I do have a few Patreon questions. Got a ton of them, actually. Handpicked a few of them, but John Macri says, if you could sit down with two people, one from past history and one alive today, who would they be and why?
I've had, a number of chances to sit down and talk with people like that.
So maybe just not alive.
You're not alive, yeah. It'd sure be interesting to sit down and talk to, some of the folks who created the world that we are in today. Some of the architects of this world, and get their take on where we are. And
do you mean like going back to Socrates, or more?
No, like the folks that have created the architecture that we have now, like the Churchills and the Eisenhowers, and it'd be neat to, but stepping back in time, you're going to another place. That place no longer exists. I always think I miss that time when I was a young frogman in San Diego. Miss all the friends that we had there. Miss the operational tempo that we had, and I've since gone back to San Diego. I've seen the old house, and I've reconnected with some of those friends. But that time no longer exists. Going back in time and talking to a person, as much as I would want to sit down and talk to Lincoln, I'm not sure that I would fully understand the conversation.
Yeah.
But there's those.
Especially the further back you go.
Yeah, the further back you go, you're going to be, you're going to be talking to an alien.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah, think about it. It's not too terribly long ago we had slavery. Yeah. There's some other, imagine, walking around with everything that we know now in a world like that. It's a foreign place. But I don't know, like talking to a Lincoln, talking to a Churchill, talking to, I certainly wouldn't pass up the chance.
Yeah.
And if there is an afterlife, maybe we get to do that.
Yeah. I hope so. Ryan Hill says, who is the baddest, in a good way, SEAL that you've ever heard of in your studies that people resoundingly agree on? Is there one?
Well, Bob Gallagher.
Yeah. Bobby G. Did he get fragged in the ass by chance?
You did? I don't know if it... Well, he blew himself up on an EOD problem. He was trying to put safety pins back in grenades. Blew himself up. Blew off... I think blew off the tip of a finger. Got medevac for that. Got out of the... escaped from the hospital and got back with the platoon.
Not released, escaped.
Yeah. I don't know. Ron Yaw. I mean, Ron Yaw had this... he ended up augmenting the 7th Platoon towards the end, and then ended up going, serving a whole career and becoming the commanding officer of SEAL Team 6. Had his heel blown off in that last mission that I write about. He had a knack for a trick that he would use to pick up girls in bars, where he would walk up to girls, with a full mug of beer, and if they didn't talk to him, he would bite off chunks of the mug and chew the glass. And one of my first interviews with him, I was like, Ron, I got to ask you, one, what's the trick, and two, did it work? And he said, one, there's no trick. You just chew the glass. And two, no, it never did.
I would be scared of the woman that would say, that's the guy from doing that.
Yeah.
It's either going to be the best night of your life, or you're going to wake up in a fucking bathtub full of ice. Right.
No, Bob Gallagher's, he's by far the most, somebody gave me and I think this made it into the book. Roy Matthews said, you might be able to beat up Bob in a fight, but you never want to go to sleep after. Yeah. He was not, what we would think of today as a SEAL. He wasn't, or didn't look like a SEAL. He was, he had a tendency to put on weight. He was bald, mustache. He looked like a regular Navy chief. Yeah. He was just, very, quietly relentless, and had a lot of demons. He grew up in a really tough environment, essentially an orphan. Was very protective of his sister, who was his only sibling, and he would, sneak out of his orphanage when he was, as young as 4 years old. Sneak out of his side of the Catholic orphanage and cross like a field in the middle of the night, which was like 100 yards long. Sneak across, go to the girls' dorm, just so to sneak up and sleep with his sister, because she couldn't sleep without him.
Wow!
So he would,
man,
and he, he had his own family, and he deployed to Vietnam, and he couldn't really ever disconnect from it. He had that sort of, Rambo type quality that, we, filmmakers love, but he really had it. He couldn't leave the war.
Yeah. Man, it's fascinating. It's as fascinating as it is tragic.
Yeah, it was. And he could never really connect with his own sons. And I think the whole family suffered for it.
Yeah.
I had a chance. So once the book was finally finished, the manuscript was done. Excuse me. The manuscript wasn't done. I was still working on it. I'd talked to all of his family members. I talked to all of his platoon mates. I'd never been successful in getting in touch with him. Finally, I talked to his ex-wife, and she gave me a working phone number that I knew was going to be good. So I was ready to talk to him. I'd done all the research, but I was nervous. And I was like, so I called him, and he answered in a very thin, high voice that I was not expecting. And I said, hey, Bob, Ben Milligan, I'm working on a history of the SEAL teams. I would love to talk to you. I've talked to the following people. I'm a former SEAL myself. And these are the things that I'd like to talk to you about. Would you be interested in talking to me? And he said, no, I'm not interested. And he hung up.
Wow.
And I set the phone down. I was a little bit stunned, but not at all surprised. And I had to say to myself, if he had given me a different response, I would have been disappointed. Everything that I knew about him, I was like, of course he wouldn't talk to me.
Yeah. Man, that's, I don't know. I keep using the word tragic, but man, I wish that he would. I wish that he would have disappointed you and talked to you, but
he did. So he never read. Well, I sent him so when the manuscript was done, the galley copies came out and everything like that, I had 7 copies to send out, and sent 6 out, and 1 to Pete Peterson, and Pete, so Bob was not doing well. Everybody didn't think Bob was going to make it much longer. And Pete told me after the fact that he read his copy and wrote a note and dropped his copy off at Bob's. And Bob never spoke about it. But when they were clearing Bob's house out after the fact, and putting stuff away and everything, they found a copy of his book. And in the book, he had written a note that he wanted it to go to another SEAL that was a close friend of his, and it said, "You have to read this."
Wow.
So that was pretty cool.
Man, what a huge honor. That's amazing. Man. John Olson wants to know, after researching so many stories about extraordinary men and missions, are there any you find yourself thinking about or coming back to, and why?
I come back to the whole China chapter all the time. Such a remarkable, forgotten piece of our history. It was when I was making the transition from my World War II chapters to my Korea chapters, I knew that the UDTs were going to be getting involved in guerrilla operations, and I had a vague idea that the Navy was involved in guerrilla warfare in China in World War II, but I was like, I'm not going to cover that. It's too much. I want to get into Korea. I've spent the last 2.5 years in World War II. It's enough. So I started to work on the Korea, and I was like, as sort of a compensation, I was like, I'll pay some lip service to this China experience in my introductory paragraph to my UDT Korea chapter. And so I was like, I need to do enough research for 1 paragraph. So I did that, and then realized that I'd done a little bit more research than 1 paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs. So like, I think my reader will tolerate 2 paragraphs before I move on to this. And then I was like, well, maybe I can just squeeze a little bit more into it. Before I knew it, I had 3 pages. 3 pages of this China experience. I was like, son of a bitch. It derailed my whole writing process by 1.5 years. I spent 1.5 years just trying to understand the Navy's experience in China in World War II.
Wow.
I think the reason I keep coming back to it is because, there's been a lot of talk about how, in the wake of us drawing down from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the global war on terror, we have reoriented toward this concept of great power competition, namely, this great power competition with China. And I always think there's really only one institution that still exists in the U.S. order of battle that has fought a mainland war in China, and that is the U.S. Navy. That's how remarkable is that? That the maritime branch of service is the only one that's fought an actual mainland war in this country, and we know nothing about it. And when I went to the archive to dip into this material, there was a wall of boxes, and most of them had not been touched since they'd been placed there. And so I think about that. We have this enormously important experiment that the U.S. Navy, the U.S. military undertook in this country, and we're not looking at it.
What span of years during?
This was from 1942 to 1945.
Wow.
And we, with a handful of sailors, we led, a 50,000-man guerrilla force, tying down, probably between 600 and 1 million Japanese soldiers.
Man.
It's remarkable. It's a remarkably, and that, if anything, and these aren't special operations trained guys. These were fleet sailors that got enlisted with a handful of Marines. It wasn't until the amphibious Roger program was created, explicitly for that mission, that you have anything that would, closely resemble a special operations soldier. But just because they weren't special operations trained soldiers doesn't mean it wasn't a special operation. It was more with less, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was this massive, small investment, huge strategic impact mission. And I think about it all the time.
Potential next book?
I don't want to ever, cover the same ground twice. I mean, it's fascinating. And there are other stories that I didn't cover that could be, standalone books.
Yeah.
I do my best to leave everything on the field.
Yeah. You kind of already answered this or alluded to it at least. Dano says Marcinko, truth versus fiction. Sounds like a fair bit of fiction.
Yeah, a fair bit of fiction, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't an important character. He absolutely was. He was, the best way I've heard Dick described is by Rick Woolard. Rick Woolard, served with him in Vietnam, and then later, Dick was Rick was a follow-on commanding officer of SEAL Team 6. He knew Dick very well, and he said one thing about Dick was that he could be anything to anyone he needed to be. He was he could sit in a boardroom, or he could sit in a meeting with the top planners in the U.S. Navy and articulate the capabilities of the SEAL teams better than anyone else. And at the same time, he could leave that meeting, rip off his uniform and go have beers with a bunch of dock workers and seem like he was just a dock worker. He was
chameleon.
He was in a bit, but he was capable of pushing the SEAL teams into directions that maybe they wouldn't have gotten into without a bull in the china shop like him.
Yeah. Yeah, he was definitely a polarizing character and a fascinating guy.
What's interesting about somebody like that, though, is why would you make up stories about your service? Because there's, I have plenty of people that have told me, the Silver Star that he was awarded, he wasn't even on the mission for which the Silver Star was written. He had somebody write that thing up, and the justification was, well, he did similar things on other missions. He just wasn't on that mission. But
way to go about it.
Yeah, right. But here's a guy who has completely, credible, honorable service, who's, embellishing, his record just to make himself look better, or maybe it's just to, make himself look better in front of his peers so he gets the promotion. I don't know why.
Yeah,
but it's just it's one of those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. This one may go beyond the scope of kind of what you wanted to get into, but Claire asks, given your firsthand perspective of war as an operator and having studied so many in depth, where do you think our next major conflict will take place, globally or domestically? Are we ready, or do you possibly think we're technically already in it?
I get asked, everyone wants to bootstrap history exactly like this, and that's the question that I get most asked whenever I give a presentation back to the community or to another organization. Where are we going next? What's the next war? How are we going to fight it? I would say, I don't know, but nobody else does either. Every time someone has tried to predict where we're going to fight, how we're going to fight, who that opponent's going to be, they've been wrong. And one of the last talks that I gave to, big conference, lots of decision makers and planners, the direction I had was, we want you to come in and talk about how our next war is going to be with China. It's like, well, I'm not going to do that, but I said that in my opening remarks. I said everybody who has tried to predict this has been wrong, and I said, well, I'll tell you how other people have, tried to anticipate what those next problems are going to be and who's been successful and who hasn't. Now, 6 weeks after I said I'm not going to talk about how China is going to be the next global problem, October 7th happens. The war on terror is reinvigorated. We don't know what the next thing is going to be. And if we do know where the next thing is going to be, or the next opponent's going to be, maybe it's going to be China, but it's not necessarily going to happen in the South Pacific. It could happen in China, it could happen in Africa over some sort of resource, something like that. The one thing that we have learned about nuclear weapons is they're very good at preventing big-scale global war. We're probably going to be facing another century of proxy conflict. We just don't know what that proxy conflict is going to look like. We're in the midst of, rapid technological change, and we've been in the midst of other rapid, technological changes in the past. Technology, though, tends to be outmaneuvered before it's eclipsed. Though organizational countermeasures tend to come up with ways to negate technology. Before technology is used to negate technology. We'll see.
Yeah. Little cat and mouse. So Ben and I are going to sit down after the show. This is Patreon exclusive only. So if you want to catch this stuff, you got to go to Patreon and sign up there. But we're going to talk about a couple of key historical SEAL missions, and run through some of the details there. But before we wrap up the main interview, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have? And is there anything else that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. Thank you for the interview.
Tired of talking.
I have to say, I suspect most people are tired of listening to me.
Fuck no, they're not. They can blow me if they are. I'm just kidding. You know I love you guys.
I appreciate it. This has been great.
No, I appreciate you coming. It's such a fascinating interview, and honestly a huge treat for me to be able to interview you, because I learned so many things today, and it's a very humbling experience to listen to the amount of man hours. I mean, could you ballpark how many man hours of research you've put into it?
No, I mean I would say that when I was in the full throes of the book, I was doing no less than 5 hours a day for about 10 years.
Wow. Yeah, it's a ton of time. So it's just, like I said, it's both fascinating and humbling, and just a treat to be able to interview you and hear you discuss and explain all these things in such thorough detail. So,
thanks.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Do have some parting gifts here for you.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe you can send me a signed book in return if you don't mind. But so the cursorary coin, which just commemorates the journey or the experience here on Mic Drop, and then in that black box, a big thanks to John Johnston, and Champion Choice Silver for another commemorative piece.
Oh my gosh.
There's your favorite color in there, so that's why I asked. So if you
this
could
is
show
great,
it.
thank you.
So
thank you very much. Oh my goodness.
I know you can't talk about what you do now, but wear that to work one day, maybe on your last day, and shove it up everybody's ass.
Thank you very much. This is great. Wonderful.
Thank you for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, if you want to catch some of these after-action style reports on a couple of these missions, we're going to do that on Patreon. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a fascinating trip down memory lane, and being able to hear just all of the details been remarkable. So hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mic Drop.